Ryan Smith was born in 1975 in San Diego, California, USA. From a young age, he harbored a strong desire to travel and learn about different cultures around the world. This passion ultimately led him to emigrate from his home country. At 27, Ryan was eager to explore Eurasia, particularly the former Soviet Union. In 2002, he embarked on a journey to Azerbaijan, a nation located at the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia, bordered by the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. For Ryan, it was the ideal starting point for his adventures. In Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, Ryan immersed himself in the local language and culture. He worked in a carpet market within the walled city, learning about one of the region's oldest and most valued crafts. The tradition of carpet making is passed down through generations, and Ryan was captivated by the beauty of the carpets. This experience inspired him to consider starting a business focused on handmade carpets. In December 2005, Ryan returned to the United States to launch his project. While there, he met and married a young teacher named Laura. She encouraged Ryan to restrict his travels and concentrate on their life together. In 2011, they traveled to Georgia, a former Soviet republic bordering Azerbaijan, where they got married in the city of Marnoli and planned to produce traditional carpets. In 2014, their son Caleb was born. Meanwhile, Ryan and Laura worked on their long-awaited project of weaving handmade carpets using traditional Azerbaijani techniques that Ryan had developed. Each carpet had the potential to sell for over $1,000 in international markets. While Laura taught English at a local government school, Ryan traveled to nearby villages to find weavers to collaborate with. However, Ryan was surprised to find few artisans still practicing traditional methods. Some artisans who had initially expressed interest in the project later withdrew for various reasons, including disagreements over pricing and uncertainty about the designs. Ryan shared on his blog that during a 4-day visit to Kalari, a place he had not been to before, he found artisans who were willing to join his project. Ryan aimed to do more than just make a profit or preserve an ancient culture. He wanted to become a community benefactor by inviting women from the countryside, who possessed traditional weaving skills, to join his project. This opportunity would allow them to revive their craft and support their families. As a result, Ryan and Laura became one of the most respected couples in their town. Ryan considered this place to be incredibly special. His wife, Laura, connected deeply with the city and its people, engaging in teaching and forging numerous friendships. Meanwhile, Ryan promoted the art of carpet weaving from the ancient culture and earned admiration from the locals. Most residents regarded them as kind and trustworthy individuals they could turn to for help. They quickly assimilated into the local society, traditions, and culture, which led to them applying for citizenship in 2012, becoming citizens of both the United States and the state of Georgia. Laura and Ryan planned to build a kindergarten with a playground using their own funds. Just when they felt they had found a true home and a promising future for their family, tragedy struck unexpectedly, shattering all their dreams. In July 2018, Ryan, aged 43, and Laura, aged 42, decided to take a short vacation with their son Caleb to escape their daily routine. Laura's friend, Sabina Taliboba, recounted that Laura called her on July 4th to share their plans to go to the mountains, notifying her that they would be away for 2 days. They selected a small and picturesque spot near the Godori Mountains, known for its beautiful trails, waterfalls, and gorges, perfect for quiet walks and picnics in nature. However, instead of finding peace, they encountered a nightmare. Concerned about getting lost and wanting a safe experience for their son Caleb, they sought a local guide. They met Mokaz Kabori, a 19-year-old shepherd who, while not a resident of the area, was familiar with it as he often grazed livestock there. Mokaz had a calm demeanor and was well regarded by the locals, leading them to hire him as their guide. Shortly after their journey into the mountains began, Ryan and Laura discovered Mokaz's disturbing intentions. They hiked up to a clearing where they set up camp for dinner, near one of the local springs for fresh water. At some point, Ryan became concerned about how Mokaz was handling his weapon, which he always carried. This led to a heated argument between them. In an unexpected turn of events, Marquez turned the weapon on Ryan and attacked him in the head, followed by an attack to his back. The echoes of the gunfire were drowned out by Laura's terrified screams and Caleb's cries, but the worst was yet to unfold. Despite Laura's desperate pleas, Marquez pressed the weapon against Caleb's head and attacked the boy at point-blank range. Laura, terrified and unable to fully comprehend the horror unfolding before her, was left in shock. She froze in place, but as she met Marquez's cold stare, she realized his intentions. Driven by instinct to survive, Laura ran as fast as she could to escape the fate that had befallen her husband and son. However, when she reached the edge of the cliff by the waterfall, she found herself with nowhere to go. Marquez used his weapon to assault her, then pushed her off the cliff, causing her to land on the riverbank below. Afterward, investigators uncovered that Marquez had buried Caleb's body in a concealed location, along with the weapon he used. He then returned to the village as if nothing had happened. After several days without word from Laura, her friend Sabina grew concerned. She tried to contact both Laura and Ryan but received no response. Ryan's friends were also puzzled, as it was very unusual for him to go silent for such an extended period. On Friday, July 6, 2018, the Emergency Response and Emergency Situations Center received a report about a Georgian-American family that might be missing in the mountains. The caller, Sabina, informed them that the Smith family, including their 4-year-old son, had not been reachable for over 2 days. In response, a team of 15 rescuers was dispatched to the area where the family was last seen. When the rescuers arrived, they discovered Laura's belongings and vehicle. As they continued along the trail, they made a shocking discovery. They found a lifeless body at the bottom of a waterfall. This prompted the rescuers to intensify their search and widen the area they were covering. Later, they located another human body about 800 meters from the waterfall. Due to the heat and humidity typical of the season, the decomposition of the bodies was rapid. Initially, authorities reported that the victims showed no signs of violence. In accordance with Georgia's criminal code, an investigation was initiated, but details about Laura and Ryan's child, Caleb, remained unclear for several days. Investigators discovered that Marquez Kabori was the last person in contact with the family. As a result, he was arrested, and during questioning, he claimed to know the whereabouts of Caleb. For days after the Smith family went hiking in the mountains, he led investigators to where he had buried Caleb and the murder weapon. The following day, the Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs announced that Marquez had been taken into custody and charged with the murders of the Smith family. This tragic incident shocked the nation, particularly in the Marnulli area and the local weaving community. The American consulate also expressed concern over the crime, and an FBI team joined Georgian authorities in the investigation, assisting with evidence collection and analysis. On July 11, the Tbilisi Municipal Court ordered that Marquez, who pleaded not guilty, be held in custody. He alleged that 2 foreigners in a black car were the actual killers. According to Marquez, these individuals murdered the Smith family, threatened him and his family to ensure he wouldn't report them to the police, and left him alive to divert suspicion onto him. Marquez's lawyer dismissed claims of violence against Laura, arguing that Marquez was incapable of such acts because he was a virgin. On July 12, friends, media activists, and members of public organizations gathered outside Ryan's house in Marnulli with toys, flowers, and candles to pay their respects and remember his family. The following day, Marquez's lawyer affirmed his client's innocence, stating that the crime was committed by 2 foreigners and that Marquez had initially pleaded guilty due to psychological pressure. However, evidence against Marquez began to surface. The most significant evidence came from the autopsy report of the victims. Ryan had 2 weapon wounds, one to the head and one to the back. Caleb was attacked in the head at close range. In Laura's case, the abuse and assault were confirmed, and DNA tests showed that the biological material found on her and her underwear matched Marquez's DNA. Additionally, DNA from both Ryan and Marquez was discovered on the murder weapon. An FBI technical examination of the Smith family and Marquez's phones revealed that Marquez's phone contained photos of Laura's lifeless body at the falls. He had shown these photos to several locals, claiming he had stumbled upon the body while walking in the area. Investigators also discovered that Maucaz had visited several adult websites in the days leading up to the incident. These findings led investigators to believe that Maucaz had a personal interest in Laura and that his actions were premeditated from the moment the Smith family contacted him for a trip to the falls. Following the investigation's results, Maucaz's lawyer, David, resigned, citing principled reasons for not being able to continue defending him. Another lawyer took over the case, maintaining Maucaz's innocence and filing a motion to retract his earlier confession. Maucaz's mother supported her son and agreed with the position of the new lawyer. The defense argued that police may have coerced Maucaz into confessing under threats of imprisonment. His family claimed that the high-profile nature of the case led the authorities to charge him quickly in order to close it. Nevertheless, on November 9, 2018, Maucaz Kabori was formally charged with murdering 3 members of the Smith family. He also faced additional abuse charges against Laura. A psychological evaluation indicated that Maucaz was mentally fit for trial. His pre-trial detention was scheduled to end on April 9, 2019, but the prosecutor asserted that they had strong evidence of his guilt and that he would receive appropriate punishment for his crimes. On March 25, 2019, the court unanimously found Maucaz guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty toward 3 members of the Smith family. He committed these murders to cover up another crime, namely, the abuse. On March 27, 2019, Judge Goga Kopriashvili of the Gori District Court sentenced Maucaz Kabori to life in prison. While his family protested the sentence, claiming it was unjust, the friends and family of Smith felt relieved by the verdict. The defense attorneys announced plans to appeal, arguing that there were procedural errors in the trial. The U.S. consul in Georgia stated that the verdict brought justice to the Smith family, noting that the evidence clearly proved Maucaz's guilt. From the moment Ryan and Laura Smith arrived in Georgia, they earned the love and respect of the Marnoli community. Their brutal murder deeply affected the community they had chosen to make their home. Laura and Ryan Smith's community project not only revived an ancient tradition but also provided income and stability to many local women. After their tragic deaths, many women who were striving to build successful businesses experienced sadness and uncertainty. However, the project was later revitalized by investors who supported Ryan's vision and created opportunities for local artisans. Ryan and Laura left their familiar life in the West to explore a new culture. They received a warm welcome from the community, but their lives were filled with sadness because there was a mysterious person hiding their true nature behind the guise of a kind shepherd. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jody Herring. In the small town of Berlin, Vermont, there lived a young woman named Jody Herring. Born in 1975, she came from a large family. In her early years, Jody was known to be a happy child, close to her father, and naturally bright and energetic. However, as she grew older, Jody faced several tragic incidents. The first and most traumatic occurred when she was about 5 years old. Her father was found dead on the lawn of their family home. It was believed he ended his life, as a weapon with his fingerprints was found near his hand. Jody was home at the time, and her father's death came as a shock to her. She gradually became deeply saddened by the loss, but she and her family were convinced that her father had not intended to harm himself. Shortly before his death, Jody's father revealed that he always kept a weapon nearby, even hiding a weapon under his pillow at night. This weapon was found at the scene of his death, and witnesses reported that it was placed in his hand. Ultimately, it was concluded that he ended his life. Following this tragedy, Jody began experiencing frequent seizures, but her family did not seek help from a psychiatrist. The family's neglect towards Jody was evident in many ways, affecting her emotions and behavior as she grew up. Family members and others observed her sitting for hours, staring blankly into space, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. One aunt described Jody as being completely detached from the world, while another noted that Jody always had a lifeless expression during her youth. Jody faced abuse from her mother and some relatives. The neglect escalated to the point where, at just 11 years old, Jody and her 14-year-old brother were kicked out of their home by their mother. After that, Jody often slept in the back seat of a car, and during particularly difficult times, she stayed with her grandparents. As a result, Jody grew up in a troubling and challenging environment. At 17, she was abused, which led to her first pregnancy and the birth of her child. A few years later, she had 2 more children out of wedlock. As she entered adulthood, Jody faced uncertainty and distress. Her daily life revolved around drinking and using banned substances, and her mental health continued to decline without proper care. Despite being a mother of 3, Jody was homeless. She did not have stable housing and often moved in with relatives to avoid living on the streets. Jody had multiple encounters with law enforcement and was known to the authorities for various offenses. Her legal troubles began in November 1998, when, at 23 years old, she was arrested for driving under the influence. This incident resulted in several months in jail. In June 2001, Jody faced charges of selling counterfeit goods, and just 5 months later, she was convicted again of drunk driving. In May 2003, Jody was charged and convicted for possessing a banned substance. By November 2015, it became evident that she had repeatedly broken the terms of her probation. Concerned about her lifestyle, social services began to investigate how her children were being cared for. Unfortunately for Jody, but possibly better for her children, the Department of Children and Family Affairs took them away one by one. Ultimately, only 1 child remained in Jody's custody, while her other children were placed with foster parents. Jody tried her best to keep her youngest child close. However, when she and her youngest daughter became homeless, the school principal discovered this. He offered to help them, but during their conversations, he realized that Jody was very inconsistent in her reasoning, and her actions lacked logic. It was unclear whether this was due to her frequent use of banned substances or a decline in her mental health. Despite the offer of assistance, Jody firmly rejected help from the school. This made people who genuinely wanted to help her feel that she had no desire to change her bad habits for the sake of her youngest child. Therefore, the school principal decided that Jody was unable to care for her youngest daughter in her current mental state, prompting a call to the Department of Family and Children's Affairs once again. At this point, Jody was feeling increasingly anxious and fearful about the possibility of losing her last child. Sadly, her addiction overshadowed her anxiety. Even though she was homeless, Jody continued to drink and use banned substances, which further worsened her mental health. Her apathy and refusal to change eventually led to her youngest daughter being taken away for the child's safety. When Jody discovered that the school principal had reported her to the Department of Family and Children's Affairs, she became extremely angry. Witnesses said that Jody lost control and was unable to think clearly. She expressed a desire to harm everyone involved in taking her children. She was consumed by her anger and sought revenge, blaming those around her. She showed her partner, Henry Premont, a handwritten list of people she wanted to kill, starting with her 2 cousins, Rhonda and Regina. It was clear that Jody was having dangerous thoughts. She attempted to buy a weapon twice but was denied both times after background checks. In May 2015, Jody's emotional and mental state began to deteriorate when she called Rhonda and Regina and threatened them. They found the call very disturbing, so they called emergency services to check on Jody. When the ambulance arrived, they found Jody lying on her bed in a semi-conscious state, surrounded by empty pill bottles and photos of her children, indicating a possible attempt to end her life. Following this incident, Jody was mandated to undergo mental health treatment at a nearby facility for 90 days. This treatment was intended to help Jody recover and get the support she needed. However, Jody was disruptive and did not want to continue treatment. Instead, she asked to be released. Consequently, just a month later, she was released, despite the doctor's recommendation to continue. The doctor had highlighted her instability, but his advice was not binding, and the facility decided to let her go. Unfortunately, she returned to her old environment, making the decision of the medical facility a mistake for which they had to suffer the consequences. On August 7, 2015, in the small town of Berlin, Vermont, Tiffany, Rhonda's daughter and Jody's niece, was preparing to visit a friend. Before leaving, she stopped to listen to a message on the answering machine. In the message, she heard Jody's angry voice, warning that Rhonda and Regina should stop calling the department, or she would kill them. Tiffany wasn't worried because such outbursts were typical of Jody's behavior, so she ignored the message and continued to meet her friend. Just 2 hours later, Jody's brother Dwayne received 2 voice messages from her. He was busy and couldn't answer the phone in time, but in the messages, Jody urged him to contact her immediately, saying he might regret not contacting her sooner. Jody leaves her temporary home and goes to the place she hates the most, the Department of Children and Families. When she arrived, she turned off the car and sat inside, seemingly waiting for something. Passers-by saw her screaming in the car, but it appeared she was only talking to herself. Despite her distress, no one stopped to check on her. They were all too busy with their own lives. It was unclear why Jody was outside the Department of Children and Family Affairs. Perhaps she was waiting for someone, but her children were in the care of others and could not be there. Shortly after 5 p.m., a woman named Lara Sobel emerged from the building. Lara, 48 years old, is a social worker with the Vermont Department of Children and Families. She was recognized for her intelligence. She attended the University of Vermont, earning a bachelor's degree in political science in 1989, followed by a master's degree in social work. Since 2002, she had dedicated herself to the Department of Children and Family Affairs, where she found her passion for helping those in need. At the beginning of her career, Lara met Timothy Farini. They fell in love, moved in together, and had 2 beautiful daughters, Julia and Ilona. Lara had a kind heart and was committed to supporting families who were less fortunate than her own. Lara was assigned to handle Jody's case, a decision made without any specific reasoning. This assignment could have easily gone to another available social worker. However, Jody perceived the situation differently. She blamed Lara for her daughter's removal, which is why she was waiting in the parking lot. On August 7, 2015, Lara finished her work as usual. After a long and tiring day, she felt relieved to leave and spend time with her family. As Lara exited the building, Jody stepped out of her car. Before closing the door, Jody retrieved a large object from inside. It was a weapon. Jody approached Lara, and she didn't have time to escape. Jody suddenly raised the weapon and attacked Lara in the face. After Lara collapsed, Jody attacked her again at close range, killing her instantly. Jody began jumping around the parking lot, brandishing the weapon and shouting that they deserved it for taking her 9-year-old daughter away. It was evident that Jody was aware of her actions. After she placed the weapon on the sidewalk, 2 bystanders quickly knocked her to the ground. Jody did not struggle. Instead, she calmly waited for the police to arrive. She had accomplished her goal, and nothing else mattered to her. When the police showed up, they noticed that Jody appeared calm and even laughed. As an officer helped her up, he spotted a red stain on her boot and asked her about it. Jody smirked, brushed it off with her boot, and described it as a trifling matter. In reality, it was Lara's blood. Jody was promptly taken into custody. Following her arrest, a more tragic story began to emerge. On the morning of Jody's arrest, her niece Tiffany, unaware of the situation, decided to visit her mother Rhonda, Aunt Regina, and grandmother Julianne Falzerano. Tiffany hadn't heard from them in almost a day, which was unusual since they typically called daily. By 8 a.m., Tiffany was driving to their house on Airport Road in Berlin. When she and her friend arrived, they noticed the front door was wide open. As they entered, Tiffany was met with a horrifying sight. She found her mother and grandmother lying on the floor, both dead. They had been attacked in the head. Tiffany hurried upstairs, anxious to find Regina alive, but sadly, her aunt had also been killed. It appeared that Regina had fought back before she died, and the police were called. After a thorough investigation, detectives discovered that the bullets came from the weapon that Jody had used. Devastated and searching for answers, Tiffany could only think of one person who could have harmed her family, Jody Herring. As a result, the charges against Jody changed from one murder to multiple counts of murder, leaving the community in shock. The trial received significant media attention, particularly concerning Jody's mental health. Psychiatrists conducted a comprehensive evaluation and diagnosed her with severe anxiety disorder. This condition likely contributed to her inability to trust others and her repeated refusal of available help. Nevertheless, this mental health issue did not exempt her from facing legal consequences. Jody was declared sane and competent to stand trial. During the trial, Jody appeared emotionally detached, often staring blankly. However, she expressed her true feelings when talking to Rhonda and Regina's family. She said that she had never been a bad person in her life and wished she could go back to that day, although she also admitted that it was impossible. The jury learned that the weapon used in the killings belonged to her partner, Henry Premont, with whom she had been living, and that she had taken the weapon without his knowledge. After the trial, Jody Herring was found guilty of second-degree murder for the deaths of her cousins, Rhonda and Regina, as well as her aunt, Julianne Falzerano. She received a 20-year sentence for each life lost. Additionally, she was convicted of first-degree murder for the murder of Lara Sobel, resulting in a life sentence without the chance of parole. Later, she attempted to appeal her sentence, but the court denied her request due to concerns that she would remain a danger to herself and society. In conclusion, Jody will spend the rest of her life in prison. Some may feel sympathy for her because she lost her children, but her cruel actions mean she will never see them again. This case has raised many questions about the role of social workers and how to prevent crimes linked to mental health. For instance, why was Jody allowed to leave the psychiatric ward so soon despite her emotional instability? Would staying in treatment have made a difference? How did Jody gain access to weapons? And are social workers being adequately protected from dangerous individuals? Jody's actions have caused immense suffering, affecting both the Herring family and Lara's family, as well as her own. Lara's children will grow up without a mother, and Tiffany will suffer the effects of losing her family. After Lara's death, the University of Vermont, where she earned her degrees, offered full scholarships for her children to honor her. While improvements are slow, there is an ongoing effort to enhance the safety of social workers. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Megan Hargan. In 1983, Steve and Pamela Hargan welcomed their first daughter Megan, and 2 years later, their second daughter Ashley was born. Almost 8 years later, in 1993, they had another daughter, Helen. However, tensions within the family began to rise. Steve and Pamela started to argue, which ultimately led to their divorce while the girls were still young. Pamela received custody of the daughters, and soon after, she and the girls relocated to Potomac, Maryland. Pamela loves and cares for her daughters as well as for her work. She worked for a decade as a human resources manager before advancing to vice president at a large company. Neighbors noted that her daughters got along well and often played in their backyard with their pets. Due to her job requiring travel both domestically and internationally, eldest daughter Megan helped her mother raise her youngest sister Helen. Pamela's career peaked when her company merged with an international scientific applications corporation, resulting in a significant increase in her income. Despite this, she remained very diligent in her charity work and regularly donated part of her income to help people in difficult circumstances. She also provided generously for her family, ensuring her daughters had everything they wanted. Thanks to her professional success, Pamela was able to purchase a stunning property worth millions in a trendy area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The family's lifestyle was enviable, and Pamela took pride in her daughters, serving as a role model for others. However, they also faced envy from some. Beneath their seemingly perfect life, the family encountered common issues. As the girls grew older, a rivalry developed between them. Pamela noticed that Megan was facing the most difficulties due to her parents' divorce. This led her to develop feelings of jealousy and resentment towards her younger sister, Helen. She expressed her frustration by accusing their mother, Pamela, of favoring Helen. Her resentment deepened after Helen graduated high school and, like their mother, enrolled at the University of Dallas in 2014. At university, Helen became friends with a young woman named Erin. Initially, Erin viewed Helen as a modest and shy girl who rarely smiled. However, as they got to know each other better, they formed a close friendship. Erin discovered that Helen was actually a kind and sincere person dedicated to her studies. Despite her family's wealth and good standing, Helen took a part-time job as a waitress at a restaurant near the university. It was there that she met Carlos Gutierrez, a 30-year-old from Texas. They quickly started dating, becoming nearly inseparable. In 2017, Helen's middle sister, Ashley, got married at the age of 32 and moved out of the family home. Megan, the eldest sister, also married at 34 to Frank, a man from West Virginia, and they had a daughter named Molly. When Frank went to serve in the military, Pamela welcomed Megan and Molly into her home, allowing them to stay as long as needed. That same year, Helen graduated from university. Although she had intended to move in with Carlos, she returned to Pamela's home in Virginia, where her older sister Megan and 6-year-old niece Molly were living. At that point, Pamela was pleased with her accomplishments and, at 63, intended to retire. She decided to renovate a house she planned to buy for her youngest daughter, Helen, in Northern Virginia. This decision upset Megan, who had always felt that her mother favored her younger sister. Over time, the relationship between the sisters, Megan and Helen, became very strained. Tamara North, the sister of Pamela and the girl's aunt, later confirmed this. She noted that Megan harbored feelings of resentment towards Helen. Having cared for Helen since she was a child, Tamara observed that Megan was unwilling to acknowledge her younger sister. Unlike Ashley, Megan refused to help care for Helen from the moment she was born and would not play with her. Although the rivalry was clear, no one could have predicted that this mix of jealousy, envy, and later greed would lead to a tragic outcome. On the evening of July 14, 2017, the neighbors of Pamela quickly realized something was wrong when they saw the Fairfax County Police arriving at the estate. The emergency call had come from Carlos, Helen's boyfriend, who was in Dallas, Texas, and far from the scene. He expressed concern for Helen's well-being after she had called him with a strange story about a shooting. When the police arrived at the building, it was already too late. Upon inspecting the premises, they discovered the body of Pamela lying face down in the bathroom, covered with a blanket. It was evident that she had suffered a fatal head injury. Moving to the second floor of the spacious house, they found Helen in her bathroom. She was sitting on the toilet with a weapon between her legs and pointed upwards. It appeared that after killing her mother, Helen had ended her life by using her socked toe to pull the trigger after removing her shoe. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that their initial hypothesis might not be correct. A family secret began to come to light. Officers secured the area around the house and interviewed neighbors. Detective Brian Byerson, who was leading the case, reached out to Steve, Pamela's ex-husband, to inform him of the tragic events. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve immediately called his other two daughters, Ashley and Megan. Megan, the oldest sister, said she was driving her daughter to West Virginia, but immediately turned around to go to her family's house. When Ashley and Megan arrived, both sisters were in shock and crying while speaking with the police. They both believed that Helen had ended her life, especially Megan. She recalled that when she left the house at 1:30 p.m., with her daughter Pamela and Helen were angry. She noted that both Pamela and Helen were very upset. Helen was particularly distressed because their mother had stopped helping her buy a house. Pamela, their mother, disapproved of Helen's relationship with Carlos and did not want Helen to move in with him. Besides, Megan said that Helen had been feeling angry and depressed for the past few months. During questioning, Ashley confirmed that Helen had previously faced emotional issues and had once talked about self-harm. Ashley also mentioned that their mother, Pamela, suspected Helen of using banned substances and wanted to seek help for her. A weapon found next to Helen confirmed that it belonged to Megan's husband, Frank. He had brought the weapon to Pamela's house because he had seen two suspicious men nearby a few days before the tragedy occurred. He requested that the police examine Megan for gunpowder residue on her hands. This was particularly important because Carlos's earlier statement had led the police in a different direction in their investigation. To uncover the truth, they needed to gather all available evidence, regardless of how confusing or insignificant it might seem, until the full story emerged. After a thorough investigation that lasted over a year, the lab confirmed the presence of gunpowder residue on Megan's hands, indicating that she had recently used a weapon. An autopsy revealed that Pamela had been shot twice, while Helen had only suffered one bullet wound. However, it was determined that the path of this bullet to Helen's neck was at an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. During the investigation at the scene, detectives noticed several unusual details. Pamela's phone was found on top of the blanket covering her, which seemed unnatural. Furthermore, no fingerprints were found on Helen's phone, despite the fact that she had called and texted Carlos before her death. There was also a small amount of blood on the weapon, raising suspicion since she should have had more blood if she had ended her life. This suggests that someone else pulled the trigger. Additionally, Megan's DNA was found in the bag with the weapon, which could be explained by her having brought the weapon into the house and handled it. Investigators discovered documents detailing Pamela's bank accounts and passwords, but these could not be used as evidence because they were not included in the search warrant. The day after the incident, Megan was allowed access to the property and belongings. When police conducted another search later, they included the albums and documents in their report, but they could not find them, indicating that someone had removed them. The strongest evidence against Megan, apart from Carlos's testimony and the police's suspicions, came from her own actions. Detectives found that just days before her mother and younger sister were killed, she was trying to buy a house for herself. She claimed she had her mother's financial help to close the deal, but in reality, she frequently changed jobs and had only $30 in her bank account. On the day of the murders, Megan needed to deposit over $400,000 to secure the purchase of her dream home. Court documents revealed that Megan was struggling financially and had tried to illegally transfer $420,000 from her mother's bank account, Pamela. Her plan was thwarted when Pamela's bank alerted her about the attempted transfer, prompting her to freeze the funds. This information was reported to the detectives by the finance department of the company, which became suspicious of the transaction and later learned about Pamela's death 5 days afterward. After the murder, Megan was called in for questioning again and was informed about the results of a fraudulent money withdrawal. Initially, she said that Pamela had wanted to transfer the funds. However, her story changed when investigators presented a recording of her conversation, and she admitted to calling the bank. Despite this, she continued to deny any involvement in her mother and younger sister's deaths. Investigators uncovered further evidence that Megan was responsible for the deaths of her mother and sister, and that she staged the incident to make it appear that Helen had killed their mother before ending her life. According to the investigators, Megan's motivation was jealousy. She felt that her mother favored her younger sister, which had troubled her throughout her life. When their wealthy and successful mother offered to buy Helen her own house, but refused to do the same for Megan, this left Megan feeling depressed and hopeless. Consumed by envy, resentment, and a desire for money, she was driven to commit these acts. The police believe that Megan had premeditated a double murder. 2 days before the incident, she spoke about suspicious men in their neighborhood, seemingly to explain the presence of the weapon in her home. Megan contacted the police to report the presence of strangers in the area. She also said that many other neighbors had similar concerns. On November 9, 2018, nearly a year and a half after Pamela and Helen's deaths, Megan was arrested at her new home in West Virginia, which she had purchased following the incident. The police held a morning press conference to announce her arrest. Detectives from the Serious Crimes Unit stated that Megan faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of the murders. Detective Brian Byerson reported that during a search of Megan's apartment, investigators uncovered crucial evidence, including a spreadsheet containing bank details and account passwords. These details were originally found in Pamela's house, but later vanished under mysterious circumstances. Megan has now appeared in court to face charges for the murders of her younger sister and mother. The final hearings in this controversial case occurred in March 2022. Alongside a significant amount of circumstantial evidence gathered by the prosecutors, one key factor in securing a conviction was the compelling testimony of Carlos Gutierrez. Carlos struggled to control his emotions as he continued his testimony. He explained that he asked Helen to leave the house, but she expressed concern for her niece Molly, who was also inside. Carlos could hear the fear in her voice over the phone, realizing how terrified she was in that moment. During subsequent calls, Helen mentioned that she could hear her mother, Pamela, dying. It seemed that Helen was following Carlos's advice to hide in a safe place, but when Carlos tried to reach her an hour later, she did not answer. Worried, he called 911 to report the situation. However, since he was in Texas, the operator informed him that they needed to contact local authorities first. After multiple calls to different numbers, Carlos finally managed to report that someone had died at the specified address and that he feared for Helen's safety. The prosecutor's office reported that Megan attacked Helen at 1 p.m. Around 1:15 p.m., Megan took Helen's phone and pretended to be her to reassure Carlos, claiming that she was fine. Ashley, the middle sister who was pregnant, also testified. She expressed regret that her son would grow up without knowing his grandmother and aunt, and that she could never have imagined that a killer was in their home. Megan's defense maintained that Helen was the one who killed Pamela and then ended her life, insisting that Megan was innocent. They argued that the police initially accepted this version, stating that Helen attacked their mother in the head after becoming upset when her mother changed her mind about buying her a house. After 13 days of trial, on March 28, 2022, Megan Hargan, who is 39 years old, was found guilty of murdering her mother, Pamela Hargan, and her younger sister, Helen Hargan, on July 14, 2017. The jury recommended a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for each murder. During the sentencing hearing in October, the judge sentenced Megan to 2 life terms in prison, following the jury's recommendations. However, on November 9, 2022, a judge overturned her double murder conviction due to juror misconduct. This decision was made after it was discovered that one juror attempted to recreate how Helen might have ended her life. The prosecutor announced plans to retry Megan for the crimes, and she remains in custody awaiting the new trial. In September 2023, Megan Hargan was tried and convicted a second time for the murder of her mother and younger sister. She was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024. After the verdict was announced, a trembling Megan leaned on her lawyer for support, while her younger sister Ashley burst into tears. Other family members of the Hargan family, present in the courtroom, embraced each other and wept after the trial. Ashley chose not to comment and preferred to keep her future plans private. Megan and her husband have divorced, and their daughter is now living with her father in West Virginia. This case highlights how jealousy and conflict among siblings can escalate if not addressed early. Such tensions can arise from minor issues and may grow into deep-seated animosity, threatening the bonds between children and parents. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Susan Bailey. Susan was born in 1965 in a small town in Minnesota, USA. She was an ordinary, carefree girl who easily made friends and was sociable. Partly due to having many siblings, her parents had 4 children in total. Susan was smart, did well in school, and was responsible and non-confrontational. From a young age, her parents taught her the importance of independence and hard work. After graduating from high school, Susan enrolled in a local college. To avoid burdening her parents financially while paying for her education, she took a job as a saleswoman. It seemed like everything was falling into place for her. However, she never enjoyed the cold and gray weather of Minnesota and dreamed of moving south. After completing her studies, she decided to relocate to another state. This decision led Susan to the sunny beaches of California, fulfilling her childhood dream. There, she quickly found a job in retail and met a man, Mr. Bailey, who would become her husband. He was calm and reserved, pursuing a military career. They married in 1988. Although Susan's family disapproved of her choice due to the challenges of Mr. Bailey's profession, they ultimately accepted her decision. In the following years, they moved several times because of her husband's military service. While he worked, Susan spent most of her time at home and felt unhappy with this lifestyle. However, he promised to leave the military after his contract ended, which he did in 1990. They then returned to California, and Susan decided to becoming pregnant with their first child, a girl named Jennifer. 4 years later, they welcomed another child. They chose to focus on their careers to support their growing family. During this time, Susan found success in her retail career and became the primary breadwinner, while her husband struggled in his job. They switched roles, with him taking on the role of a stay-at-home dad, and Susan working to provide for the family. This change was made possible when Susan accepted a job with a new clothing company. In 1997, she was promoted to regional manager of Texas, which came with significant responsibilities. Susan realized she couldn't turn down this opportunity. She and the children relocated to Texas, where they decided to settle in a small town called Denton. In 2000, the Bailey family purchased a house with 4 bedrooms, a living room, and a separate playroom in the small town. It seemed like a perfect place for a peaceful family life. As Susan became part of the local community, she met her neighbors. They had children of school age and lived across the street. They spent a lot of time together, discussing local news. However, Susan later discovered something troubling. Whenever Jennifer visited the neighbor, she would leave with items in her hands. After these visits, the neighboring family noticed that money and belongings were missing, leading them to suspect that Jennifer was stealing. Despite this, Her neighbor never brought up her concerns with Susan, possibly thinking that Susan was too busy with work and did not want to burden her with additional problems. As a result, the relationship with the neighbors became strained. Susan's son David faced several challenges. He struggled with bedwetting, which required her to change the bedding nearly every day, causing her stress. Additionally, David had behavioral issues and frequently got into trouble. However, these problems were minor compared to the bankruptcy of Susan's company, which led to her losing her job and significant income, severely impacting their family. At that time, she had started her own small cosmetic shop, but it did not compensate for the loss of her managerial position in a large firm. Eventually, she found work at another clothing store, but her new salary was much lower than her previous earnings. During this period, Susan realized her independence, while her husband struggled to find a job to support her. Their relationship became strained, and by 2006, they officially divorced. It remains unclear why her husband did not take any initiative to fight for custody of their children or their assets. He simply left everything to Susan without hesitation and agreed to pay child support. Susan was struggling with her own problems as well as those of her son and daughter, and everything seemed to be getting worse. For the first time, she felt overwhelmed by her new responsibilities. At the same time, she had to work 2 jobs to keep the family financially stable and avoid debt. This left her with little time to spend with her children. Susan was hardly ever home, and the children felt neglected. David was falling behind in school, skipping classes, and even resorting to self-harm in an attempt to get his mother's attention. His sister Jennifer take care of him, but she felt uncomfortable in that role and wanted to enjoy her own life instead. She often expressed her frustration about this. During this time, Jennifer met a boy named Paul Henson, who was a year younger than her. He lived with his family in a trailer park. Paul mentioned that he came from a troubled family, which resonated with Jennifer as she could relate to his struggles. However, Paul was quite unusual. He believed he had 2 distinct personalities. He described one of his 2 personalities as a reincarnation of a 10th century executioner, referring to it as his evil alter ego. Many of his classmates noticed Paul talking to himself, conversing with imaginary people and speaking in languages no one understood. He spent most of his free time playing fantasy computer games. Despite his unusual behavior, Paul genuinely liked Jennifer, and they started dating. Jennifer thought his eccentricities were just a product of his vivid imagination and gradually began to share his interests, playing the same games and acting oddly. For instance, they wore dog collars with each other's names. They also engaged in dark mystical practices, which eventually led to a love triangle. Paul revealed to Jennifer that one of his personalities was fond of her, while another personality of his had feelings for a girl named Marilee. Marilee was a 14-year-old from a wealthy family who appeared naive and impressionable. Marilee and Jennifer both fell under his influence, believing they all had mutual feelings for each other, leading to a complicated emotional situation. Susan Bailey strongly disliked Paul from the start and encouraged her daughter to end her relationship with the unusual Paul. However, Jennifer refused to heed her family's warnings. As a result, both their relationship and the home environment worsened quickly. Despite being told not to communicate with Paul, Jennifer was seen with him during the day when all the adults were home. Additionally, Jennifer regularly ignored her mother's requests regarding her schoolwork, chores, and taking care of David. Jennifer got a job at a fast food restaurant, which meant she was hardly ever home. This worried Susan, as David was often left unsupervised. To help, Susan's parents agreed to take David in for the month of July. During this time, they noticed an improvement in his behavior. They taught him household chores and introduced him to activities like fishing. However, They also observed some concerning behavior when David threw a tantrum in the car after his grandparents refused to buy him something on a whim. He rocked the car back and forth in frustration but calmed down as soon as they got home. This incident made his grandmother realize that David was struggling with emotional issues. Determined to help David, his grandparents began taking him to various doctors and clinics. His grandmother wanted him to stay longer so they could address his problems, but Susan was reluctant to let him stay for too long. Eventually, she bought a ticket and insisted that David return home. When he did, he surprised his mother and sister with his good behavior, and even brought Jennifer a small gift. At this point, Susan had been considering buying a car for Jennifer to make her commute to work easier, but Susan realized she didn't have enough money. Jennifer was unhappy about this and insisted she needed a car for convenience. Her mother asked her to be patient. A month later, Susan was shocked to receive a bill for the children's phone services that totaled $1,500. She found out that Jennifer had been spending all her free time talking to Paul, while David was frequently online, which led to high charges. Susan explained to her children that this was unacceptable and urged them to reduce their phone usage. Shortly after, Susan received a notification that Jennifer had spent an additional $200 on phone calls. Furious and already facing financial difficulties, Susan confronted Jennifer, who claimed that her paycheck had been delayed and that she intended to cover the costs herself. At that point, Susan decided to contact the restaurant where Jennifer worked to inquire about the delay in her daughter's pay. For the past month and a half, Jennifer had not shown up for work, so there was no paycheck for her. This shocked Susan, who realized that Jennifer had been dishonest. Instead of working, she had been spending time with her boyfriend. The next day, Susan at work, leaving David home alone, wandering around the courtyard of the house without clothes, which scared the neighbors. At that moment, Susan understood that she had lost control over her children and felt powerless to change things. To support the family, she had to work all the time. By the end of September, the situation had worsened. Jennifer decided to take advantage of her mother's constant work schedule. She started inviting Paul and Marilee over to the guest room, where her father used to live, spending time with them while Susan was away. When Susan was home, they acted like good guests, but as soon as she left, they behaved rudely. David was aware of everything but kept it a secret from Susan, supporting his sister and her friends. Eventually, they all grew tired of their parents' restrictions on their lives. This frustration led to a dangerous plan to kill Jennifer's mothers and Marilee's mothers, as well as Paul's parents. The trio became involved in various criminal ideas, including poisoning Susan with crushed prescription pills or arranging for her to be electrocuted in the bath. They also considered using a baseball bat, knives to cause serious injury. Paul even thought about shooting his father and stepmother, while Marilee planned to stab her mother while she slept. In the final phase of their plan, the teenagers intended to steal Susan's car, take their parents' money, and escape to Canada. On September 22, 2008, 14-year-old Marilee White had been missing for several days and had not answered her phone. Concerned, her mother reported her daughter as missing. Marilee's friends were also unable to contact her. Marilee's mother took action by distributing flyers with Marilee's photo and contacting the police. Fortunately, a patrol found Marilee wandering aimlessly on the outskirts of town and brought her home. During this time, Marilee revealed that Paul, a friend, had abandoned her. The police persuaded her not to run away again, and it appeared that she had calmed down. However, on the morning of September 23, 2008, Marilee's mother woke up feeling a strange presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marilee standing over her bed with a large kitchen knife. Instead of attacking, she reacted defensively as Marilee demanded the car keys to drive to the Bailey family's house. Marilee planned to gather others and escape to Canada. Although she reluctantly gave her the keys, she prevented Marilee from leaving. As soon as Marilee stepped outside, she called the police. Authorities intercepted Marilee and took her to a juvenile detention center. There, Marilee told her cellmate about a plan to kill their parents, but nobody took her seriously. At this time, Paul Henson waited for his father and stepmother to leave their trailer in the morning to go shopping. He broke into his father's room and took his .22 caliber handgun. He intended to shoot them when they returned, but they unexpectedly stopped at a movie theater and then went to visit friends, which delayed him return. Frustrated by the wait, Paul decided to leave and went back to Susan's house. That evening, Marilee was released from custody, and at the same time, Paul's parents reported him missing. The next day, September 24, David took a large knife with him to school. When the school administration learned about it, they issued a written warning to his mother. Susan put the warning on the refrigerator, but was too busy to address it right away. The following day, a police officer approached her to inform her about the search for Paul Henson, suggesting he might be at their house. Although she couldn't find him there, she noticed clear signs that he had been visiting frequently. The detective asked for permission to enter the house and talk to Jennifer, and she agreed. From the beginning, Jennifer seemed nervous. The detective knew about the teenager's deceptive plan and decided to ask Jennifer where Paul was. She said she hadn't seen her boyfriend since Saturday. The detective then requested to speak with her alone, but her mother, Susan, refused. Suspecting that Paul might be hiding in the house, the detective asked to search the premises, but Susan denied the request, stating that a warrant was needed. As a result, the detective left without any new information. The search for Paul continued, and another police officer arrived at the Bailey home. This time, Susan was informed that there were reports suggesting Paul might have a missing .22 caliber pistol from his father's trailer. Worried about safety, she reluctantly allowed the search, although she was not happy about it. During the search, they found several suspicious items, including a large butcher knife, hidden under a couch cushion in the living room. Since the knife did not belong to the Baileys, Susan accused Jennifer of planning to run away with Paul again. Jennifer explained that her friend might have accidentally left his knife at her house during his last visit, but this explanation did not convince Susan. Without waiting for the police to leave, Susan started arguing with her daughter again. Susan threatened to send her to live with her father or grandparents. During a search of Jennifer's room, they found evidence that she was packing her belongings. They also discovered several knives, which raised suspicions. However, since they couldn't find Paul's gun, the police left the house. Later, the mother found a box of ammunition hidden in one of the suitcases and became worried. She called the police again, requesting a more thorough search of her home. When they returned, the police took the ammunition but still did not find a gun. Instead, they found even more knives scattered around the house. In the trash, they found an empty bottle of antidepressants that belonged to Marilee. The Bailey family did not use such medications, but the police were unaware of this girl at the time and overlooked these concerning signs. Paul's father arrived at the house anxious about his son. He packed up Paul's belongings and left with everyone else. The following day, Susan struggled to find a way to resolve issues with her children, but nothing seemed to work. On September 25, she went to her regular job, followed by her second job, finally finishing around midnight. Throughout the day, Susan tried to contact her children, but both ignored her calls and messages. When she got home, she immediately sensed that something was off. The lights were off. Inside, she discovered the usual chaos left by her children. As she moved upstairs in the darkness, the house felt eerily quiet. As Susan climbed the stairs, someone suddenly grabbed her by the neck and covered her mouth with a cloth that had a chemical smell. Just then, Jennifer, Paul, and David stepped out of the shadows. They quickly slit Susan's throat and began stabbing her repeatedly with knives until she lay motionless on the floor within minutes. However, this horrific act was only part of their sinister plan. On September 26, Susan's mother received multiple calls from worried colleagues about Susan, as she had not shown up for her shifts that morning, a surprising behavior for someone who was known to be a workaholic. Susan's mother made several attempts to contact Susan, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, she reached out to the police department in Roanoke, Texas, asking them to check on the Bailey family's home. Over the next 2 days, patrol officers visited the house multiple times, but found no evidence that anyone was there. The lights were off, no cars were in the driveway, and all the doors and windows were closed. There were no signs of distress. It appeared as if the family had gone on vacation. Despite this, Susan's mother was deeply concerned that something might have gone wrong and urged the police to continue investigating. At 3:30 a.m. on September 28, 2008, a police officer in South Dakota spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near a closed gas station. He stopped to observe and noticed a teenager got out without turning on the headlights, did something briefly, then returned to the vehicle, and they all drove away. The officer decided to follow them. He saw that the car had Texas license plates, indicating they had traveled a long distance. However, it was unusual for teenagers to be out so late alone, making the situation seem very odd. The police officer pulled over the car and noticed a teenager driving. In the passenger seat was another minor, a girl, and in the back seat was a younger boy with a large dog. The car was stopped, and they were asked for identification, but none of them had any. The driver was 16-year-old Paul Henson. When the police officer checked his information, he discovered that Paul had been reported as a runaway and was also a suspect in a firearms case. The car belonged to Susan Bailey. Backup was requested, and they searched the stolen vehicle, but no gun was found. Jennifer's statements were inconsistent from the beginning. She appeared frightened and exhausted. Meanwhile, Texas police were alerted that the missing persons had been located. When Texas detectives heard this, they realized that Susan would never have allowed her children to travel that far without her. They suspected that something had happened to her and decided it was time to thoroughly investigate the Bailey home, especially after numerous requests from Susan's parents and colleagues. Upon entering the house, the detectives were immediately hit by a strong smell of decomposition. On the first floor, they found only a plate of pudding that had fallen on the floor. Forensic analysis later revealed that the pudding was laced with drugs. On the second floor, at the top of the stairs, they discovered Susan lying face down, blood everywhere. She had suffered 26 stab wounds and had been brutally beaten with a blunt object. The bathtub was filled with water, and an electric cord with exposed wires was hanging from the curtain plugged in. It appeared that someone had meticulously planned multiple methods to murder her. The smell of decomposition mixed with the smell of toiletries. A receipt found in the house confirmed that 13-year-old David had purchased these cleaning supplies at a local Walmart at the indicated time. In Jennifer's room, investigators found a diary in which she detailed plans for committing murder and starting a new life with Paul in Canada. They also uncovered additional evidence, including freshly cut hair belonging to Paul, clothing stained with Susan's blood, and DNA traces from Jennifer and David. It was clear that the teenagers had not effectively cleaned up the murder scene. The 3 suspects were detained in Texas, while a dog associated with them was taken to a shelter. The juvenile offenders quickly began to speak. Paul Henson accused David of the murder, claiming they all fled their town to protect the boy from the authorities. When detectives questioned David, he admitted to killing his mother and laughed. The detectives were taken aback. They did not expect such a response from a 13-year-old. Jennifer placed all the blame on Paul, insisting that she and her brother had done nothing wrong. The only person who avoided severe punishment was Marilee White. who was not in the car and had no evidence linking her to Susan's murder. However, she remained under police scrutiny for a long time and was questioned multiple times. Eventually, Marilee confirmed her friend's boyfriend's claims that they had planned to kill their families. She shared many details about their relationships. According to Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and she had become very close. Paul enjoyed being intimate with both girls simultaneously, arguing that since he was dating Jennifer and had a separate relationship with Marilee, it wasn't cheating. The group engaged in occult practices, including cutting themselves and drinking each other's blood. Jennifer's plan was to kill all their parents, escape to Canada, and start their own commune. Because of her cooperation with the police, no charges were filed against Marilee. She was compelled to testify at the trial against the other conspirators. Based on her testimony, the prosecution believed that Jennifer ambushed her mother in a hallway on the second floor and attacked her with a bat, while Paul Henson came from behind and cut her throat. David also took part in the crime and inflicted superficial stab wounds on her body. Jennifer and Paul, despite being minors, were tried as adults for murder and each received a 60-year prison sentence. They will be eligible for parole starting in 2038. David was also tried as an adult for his involvement in the crime and was convicted of complicity, receiving a 26-year sentence. He will be eligible for release in 2034 when he turns 40. Following these events, Marilee White moved to a different state with her mother and changed her name. Her photo is kept confidential to protect her safety, as she was a young witness. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Christopher Newsom was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Hugh and Mary Newsom. He was often called Chris by his friends and family. He attended Halls High School. There, he joined the baseball team, where he showcased impressive skills and teamwork. In 2002, he enrolled in Pellissippi State Technical Community College, a community college, to study carpentry. During this time, he met Shannon Christian, a beautiful girl who captivated him at first sight. Shannon was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas. Shannon, known for her beauty and kind nature, they developed a close relationship with each other. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Tennessee. Shannon graduated from Farragut High School in 2003 and then enrolled in the sociology program at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. During this time, she actively supported Christopher by attending his baseball games and traveling with him. They were often described as inseparable. Although they still lived with their parents, they dreamed of a future together. In the city of Knoxville, there lived a man named Lamarcus Davidson, who was originally from Memphis and was born on June 13, 1981. His childhood and teenage years were challenging. His mother struggled with severe substance addiction, and his father was an alcoholic. Lamarcus had a half-brother named Latalvis Cobbins. At the age of 16, Lamarcus had a chance to change his life but chose to pursue a criminal path, which quickly led him to prison. After prison, instead of turning his life around, Lamarcus began dealing illegal substances and became involved with a girl who was also entrenched in the banned substance. Unfortunately, Latalvis faced a similar fate. In 2003, Latalvis was convicted of attempted robbery in the third degree and served time. He was released on August 5, 2006, and moved to Knoxville, where he rented a room in a run-down house in the industrial area of the city. Lamarcus also tried to locate Latalvis, who was dating Vanessa Coleman. Lamarcus set off on a journey with his girlfriend. They arrived in Knoxville in early 2007. On January 5, Lamarcus and his girlfriend had a serious argument, which escalated to him hitting her. The next day, she chose to leave. On Saturday, January 6, 2007, Shannon and Christopher had plans for dinner and a party. Before meeting up, Shannon stopped by her friend's house to help her with makeup, hair, and outfit selection. They parted ways around 8 p.m., and Shannon began waiting for Christopher, who was coming from another part of town. At the same time, Lamarcus, along with his two friends George Thomas and Eric Boyd, formed a dangerous trio that arrived at LaTalvis's place with a sinister plan. During their drive, they used banned substances and talked. Around midnight, Christopher and Shannon went to the parking lot of the apartment complex. Shannon got behind the wheel of her Toyota pickup, while Christopher leaned over next to her, keeping the door open. They shared a kiss. Suddenly, armed bandits appeared and attacked them. The criminals forced the frightened couple into the back seat of the truck and drove them to a rented house. Both Shannon and Christopher had their hands tied behind their backs. Later, it was revealed that Eric had distanced himself from the gang at that time. The next morning, January 7th, Shannon's mother, Dina Christian, woke up feeling uneasy because Shannon had not returned home and wasn't answering her phone. Dina's worry increased when Shannon's best friend called to say the couple hadn't shown up at the party. So, Dina contacted the rescue service. Realizing that the kidnapping victims were adults and that the authorities were not taking action, the families of them people decided to search for their children on their own. That evening, Lamarcus arrived at Daphne's house, his girlfriend, driving Shannon's car and wearing Christopher's sneakers, which were clearly too small for him. Daphne noticed these details and asked him to take her to the rented house so she could pick up her belongings, including clothes and cosmetics. When Daphne arrived, she saw LaTalvis and George Thomas. They informed her that they couldn't get her belongings at that moment. Daphne was not allowed to enter the kitchen or the bedroom where LaTalvis was currently holding Shannon. Feeling frustrated, Daphne left. Meanwhile, Shannon and Christopher were enduring a horrific ordeal. After being subjected to various forms of torture, Christopher was taken to the railroad tracks, dressed only in a shirt and underwear. They forced him to walk barefoot, blindfolded, with his hands bound and gagged. Suddenly, loud gunshots rang out, attacking Christopher in the neck and back. He did not die immediately, but the third attack to his head was fatal. Afterward, the attackers poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. Upon returning to the house, they subjected Shannon to abuse, which was incredibly brutal and lasted for several hours. They then bound her, put her in a garbage bag, and covered her with sheets. She was slowly dying from lack of oxygen. On January 8th, the burnt body of a man was discovered near the railroad tracks, and an examination confirmed it was Christopher. The investigators tasked with informing his mother, Mary. They had to caution her that the condition of the body would be horrifying. Nevertheless, she insisted on identifying him at the morgue. Mary placed her hand on the body bag and whispered to her son. The criminals left the rented house, and Lamarcus chose to stay at Daphne's for a few nights. He claimed that his brother had suddenly disappeared with the apartment keys, making it impossible for him to get inside. Although Daphne was skeptical at first, she eventually believed him. Meanwhile, the other accomplices, LaTalvis, Vanessa, and George returned to Kentucky. In her personal diary, Vanessa wrote about how exciting her life had become and the new experiences she had gained recently. On January 9th, police officers arrived at a rented house where a tragic incident had occurred. Inside, they found Shannon's lifeless body, which was sent for examination. The doctors concluded that both victims had suffered greatly. A corrosive chemical substance was found in Shannon's throat, on her body, and in the area of her injured genitals, indicating that she had been tortured while alive. Investigators also conducted a thorough examination, and the first thing that caught the investigators' eyes was that the floor was covered in dirt. Furthermore, a pack of cigarettes was found in the living room, even though neither Shannon nor Christopher smoked. Finally, the agent stumbled upon an envelope, and after it was subjected to a fingerprint analysis, it was linked to Lamarcus. He had been involved in numerous crimes and had a criminal record. The detectives had no trouble determining his place of residence. The police department learned about the situation and intended to speak with Lamaricus first. However, he had fled. He made a critical mistake by calling Eric, which agents overheard and recorded. They also located Daphne and convinced her to assist with the investigation. During her first interrogation, a frightened Daphne shared everything she knew and mentioned that Lamaricus had pleaded with her to believe in his innocence. The detectives recorded everything on video, showing the disarray in the apartment. In addition to important shell casings, experts found video recordings, Christopher's shoes, binoculars, and a discharged .22 caliber revolver that matched the weapon used to kill Christopher. The case gained significant attention, reaching beyond the state, prompting the involvement of federal agents. Crucial information emerged about the video found in the apartment. It had been rented from a library in Kentucky by George Thomas. Meanwhile, the police needed a strategy to approach Lamaricus and decided to start with Eric. Finding Eric was straightforward, and within hours, he was located and arrested. His attempts to shift the blame onto others failed due to the strong evidence linking him to the crime. That same day, Vanessa and Latalvis was also arrested. On January 12, 2007, Shannon's family made a public appeal seeking attention from the media while waiting for updates on the investigation. They expressed gratitude for the help they received in searching for the couple and organized prayers for the funeral. Unfortunately, due to the condition of Shannon's body, the family could not hold an open ceremony. All 5 suspects provided their accounts of the events, trying to blame each other, but they agreed that the attack was motivated by robbery. Eric was believed to be the main perpetrator and was also accused of knowing about the crime beforehand and failing to intervene. The other suspects admitted to being in the rented house during the incident. There was uncertainty about whether Vanessa participated in the violence willingly or was coerced. She was placed under protection, but after several interrogations, she eventually admitted that she actively took part in the attack. On January 25, 2007, a memorial service was held at the University of Tennessee campus to honor Shannon. A year later, a golf tournament was organized, and a victims' memorial fund was created. Additionally, scholarships were established for senior high school students from Shannon's alma mater. In memory of Christopher, Pellissippi College held an annual memorial baseball tournament at Halls Community Park. Halls High School has also awarded an annual scholarship in his name to the top baseball player. George, Latalvis, and Vanessa faced charges related to the case. Initially, they were expected to be tried in separate trials from May to August 2008, but Eric was federally charged in the U.S. District Court. On April 16, 2008, Eric Boyd was found guilty on all counts, including theft and concealing a fugitive's whereabouts. He received the maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. George's attorneys requested a speedy trial, arguing that there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. Their request was granted, and the trial was scheduled for August 2008, but it was postponed to 2009. At that time, District Attorney Randy Mickles announced that if Latalvis and Vanessa were found guilty, the state would seek the death penalty. However, the trials for both Latalvis and Vanessa, as well as George's trial, were delayed due to leaks to the press about the case details. The defense argued that a change of venue was necessary to ensure a fair trial, but this request was denied by Knox County Criminal Court Judge Richard Baumgartner. He convened a new jury in Nashville in November 2008. The house where the victims were killed was purchased by a company and quickly demolished. The new owners planned to build a memorial for Shannon and Christopher on the site. By the end of August the following year, Latalvis was scheduled to stand trial. During his testimony, he admitted to lying several times during his interrogation but stated that he would only tell the truth now that he was under oath. On the first day of deliberation, the jury met for about 10 hours. The following morning, the verdict was announced. Latalvis Cobbins was found guilty of both murders but was acquitted of abuse assault charges. On August 26, 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 months later, Lamaricus went to trial. A key piece of evidence against him was the testimony of a medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Her detailed testimony about the victim's injuries left those in court in disbelief. A particularly shocking moment occurred and autopsy photographs were shown. The prosecutor's assistant fainted, leading to a brief recess during which Judge Richard warned that anyone who cried would be removed from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours and identified many new factors that increased the severity of the charges. These included the various methods used to inflict pain on the victims. Lamarcus Davidson was found guilty of first-degree aggravated robbery and first-degree murder. Additionally, he was convicted for his involvement in abuse assaults against Christopher and for committing violence against Shannon. The sentencing hearing began on October 28, 2009, at 9 a.m. and was expected to continue until Friday. The prosecutors aimed for the death penalty and called upon the victims' relatives to share their testimonies and emotions. Shannon's younger brother spoke about the importance of his sister in his life, while Dina, in a calm and measured tone, shared the devastating impact that losing her daughter had on her. Judge Richard described these crimes as some of the most inhumane cases he had ever encountered and stated that no punishment could be deemed sufficient for the murders committed. Jurors unanimously recommended that Lamarcus Davidson receive the death penalty on 4 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder against Christopher and Shannon. Dina later stated that she and her family were pleased with the sentence, feeling that justice had been achieved. Hugh, Christopher's father, hoped that other court cases would result in similar outcomes. Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the situation, leading to new theories. Some people suggested that the crimes were racially motivated because both Shannon and Christopher were white, while their attackers were black. This sparked a rally organized by white nationalists, which prompted another group to protest against them. The protesters insisted that there was no link between the crime and the race of the victims, emphasizing that the incident started with the carjacking of Shannon. They also made it clear that they had no association with the rally or its organizers. On December 8, 2009, George Thomas was found guilty of all charges against him. The specific charges included 2 counts of murder with extreme cruelty and 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. His case relied entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The sentencing hearing occurred the same day and continued until December 10. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours and returned the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for each of the 4 capital convictions. Vanessa's situation became a significant legal challenge. Although federal authorities granted her immunity, intending to make her a key witness in a federal auto theft case, state courts did not agree to release her. They ruled that federal immunity did not apply to state charges of murder and abuse assault. On May 13, 2010, Vanessa Coleman was found not guilty of first-degree murder and the crimes against Christopher. However, she was still punished for her involvement in other serious offenses, including kidnapping, abuse assault, and murder related to Shannon's case. On July 30, 2010, she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. 4 years later, just as the victims' families were starting to heal from their trauma, a shocking development raised doubts about the fairness of the trial. In March 2011, Judge Richard, who had presided over the case, revealed that he was stepping down due to banned substance addiction. The state Supreme Court then upheld the decisions made in the cases against George and Vanessa and ordered new hearings. In the second trial, Vanessa's diary became crucial evidence for prosecutors. They aimed to show Vanessa's connection to the crimes that occurred that night, using statements Vanessa had written in her diary during the days leading up to Shannon and Christopher's deaths. This evidence raised significant questions about her claims of innocence. Despite this, Vanessa maintained that she had accidentally ended up in that house and was a victim of circumstances. Her lawyer argued that her diary entries were nonsensical attempts, suggesting that the torture and murder of the victims were irrelevant to her at all. He informed the jury that Lamarcus attacked Vanessa when she tried to leave the house and that he threatened her when she mentioned seeking help. On May 17, 2013, the judge ruled on a sentencing case, stating that it was the most complex and horrific case he had ever encountered. A new trial for George resulted in a guilty verdict, with the jury once again recommending a life sentence but with the possibility of parole. Shortly after, Supreme Court Judge Walter Kurtz upheld the jury's decision, sentencing George Thomas to 2 consecutive life sentences for murder and an additional 25 years for abuse offenses. While Christopher's parents were relieved that justice was served, they remained determined to hold George's accomplices accountable as well. They made every effort to contact him, and after 11 years following the tragic events, he finally disclosed details about his collaborators in various crimes. On March 20, 2018, a Knox County grand jury returned a 36-count indictment against Eric Boyd. He was transferred from a federal correctional institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was held at the Knox County Jail, where he was being held on $1 million bail. Eric finally went to trial on state charges in August 2019. Co-defendant George Thomas testified at the trial of Eric Boyd. In exchange for his testimony, George was allowed to have his first-degree murder convictions reduced to second-degree murder, his aggravated abuse convictions reduced to aggravated assault, and his sentence reduced from life in prison with the possibility of parole to 50 years. Thus, on August 13, 2019, Eric Boyd was found guilty on 36 counts of murder and invasion of privacy, receiving a life sentence plus an additional 90 years in prison. Every year, the families of Shannon and Christopher hold a memorial walk to honor the couple. In 2022, many cyclists participated in the event, riding through the streets of Knoxville. This act became a meaningful show of respect for the grieving families, allowing people to express their remembrance and love for the victims. The organizers of the event announced their intention to continue the bike ride annually to raise public awareness about the tragic events. One can only hope that this tragic case, which took the lives of young people, will serve as an important lesson for someone. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their 2 daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwan. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sung-nam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sung-nam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sung-nam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sung-nam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sung-nam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sung-nam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sung-nam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sung-nam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sung-nam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sung-nam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife. He was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sung-nam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sung-nam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sung-nam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sun Nam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sun Nam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sun Nam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sun Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sun Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sun Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sun Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sung Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sung Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sung Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sung Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sung Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sung Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sung Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sung Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sung Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sung Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sung Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sung Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sung Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sung Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sung Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All three of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sun Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sun Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sun Nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, her friends considered Sun Nam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sun Nam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sun Nam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sun Nam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sun Nam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sun Nam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sun Nam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sun Nam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lauren Hugelmayer. Lauren Hugelmayer was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County, California. She was one of three daughters of Dale and Lori. Lauren grew up in a close-knit religious family that regularly attended their local church and was well loved in the community. She developed a reputation for being exceptionally kind, caring, known for her bright smile and vibrant personality. Lauren had a close bond with her older sister Beth, but she was even closer to her father, with whom she shared a trusting relationship. While in high school, Lauren met a classmate named Matthew Phelps, who would later play an important role in her life. At that time, it was unclear whether they were just acquaintances or had a closer relationship. After Lauren's family moved to North Carolina, Matthew transferred to another school, which interrupted their connection. After graduating from high school, Lauren chose to attend Appalachian State University, where she earned a degree in business administration and management in 2011. In 2014, Lauren received a direct message on Instagram from Matthew. While Lauren had a stable life, Matthew lived in Kent and faced significant challenges. His father was completely absent, and his mother had remarried several times. Matthew struggled to connect with any of his stepfathers. This lack of parental attention contributed to behavioral problems in his life. During high school, Matthew fell in with a bad crowd, began abusing alcohol and banned substance, particularly cough syrup, which is often misused for its psychoactive effects. His substance abuse became increasingly obvious, and his grades suffered as a result. In response, his grandparents decided to transfer him from public high school to a private Christian academy, hoping this change would help him turn his life around. Eventually, this decision paid off. Matthew improved his academic performance and distanced himself from negative influences. After graduating, he chose to enroll in a Baptist university with the goal of becoming a pastor. Although he later abandoned this ambition. Let's return to his online reunion with Lauren. Matthew and Lauren started talking to learn more about each other. They quickly discovered they had many shared interests, including being big fans of Star Wars and Harry Potter. They also connected through their strong Christian faith and then their desire to build a family together. As their conversations continued, they transitioned from chatting online to nearly daily phone calls. A few months later, they decided to enter a long-distance relationship. Their bond grew stronger, and Matthew made an effort to visit Lauren whenever possible. Eventually, he chose to move to North Carolina to be closer to her to deepen their relationship. Lauren was thrilled by this decision because she had always dreamed of finding someone with whom she could create a strong family. Most of Lauren's family welcomed Matthew, particularly her mother, who treated him like another son and tried to introduce him to the family. However, things were not as easy with Lauren's father, Dale. He seemed reluctant to accept Matthew as part of the family and often avoided him, though the reasons for this were unclear. It might have just been a feeling. Despite this, Lauren's family made efforts to help Matthew feel more comfortable, and they eventually invited him to a family dinner. That night, while playing games and talking, Matthew surprised everyone by confessing that he was married before he got into a relationship with Lauren, but his marriage had ended. He did not provide any reasons for his divorce, which raised concerns for Dale. Dale felt that Matthew's refusal to explain might indicate that he had done something wrong, making Dale worry about his daughter's future. However, Lauren and the rest of the family seemed unconcerned about this issue. It was puzzling because despite their strong traditional values, none of them questioned Matthew's honesty or character. Lauren and Matthew continued their relationship. In 2015, they decided to get engaged. On November 11, 2016, they finally got married and hosted a big celebration. The wedding was a success, and since they were both fans of Star Wars, they chose this theme for the celebration. However, there was one unpleasant incident. Matthew's mother wore white to the wedding, despite being told that it was inappropriate. This suggested that she did not approve of Lauren. Additionally, Lauren's family found Matthew's mother rude and unpleasant. Dale expressed his discontent with the wedding due to lingering doubts about his son-in-law. He tried to suppress these feelings to avoid ruining his daughter's special day. After the wedding, Lauren and Matthew appeared very happy, with Lauren frequently posting pictures of herself and Matthew on social media, suggesting they had a perfect relationship. However, behind the scenes, their situation was more complicated. Matthew's coldness and contradictions began to show, revealing his true character. Their different childhood experiences turned them into different individuals. They both had what could be said to be different views on life, so problems began to arise. Additionally, Matthew's mother's rude behavior toward Lauren worsened the situation. For reasons unknown, she excluded Lauren from the family and often made her feel unwelcome. At that time, Lauren was independent and responsible, she even juggling 3 jobs because of her love for children. She volunteered at a children's Sunday school, worked as an auditor for a pharmaceutical company, and sold scented candles, which she enjoyed. Lauren also formed strong friendships with her colleagues, who appreciated her kindness and empathy. Lauren's dreams and plans were tragically shattered in the early hours of September 1, 2017. At midnight, emergency services received a distressing call from a man who sounded confused and embarrassed. He reported, "I turned on the light and saw her lying dead on the floor, and I have blood on me. There's a bloody knife on the bed, and I think I did it. I can't believe it. I'm right next to her." This man was Lauren's husband, Matthew. Matthew claimed he couldn't remember anything. He explained that before going to bed, he had taken a lot of cough syrup, which he believed caused him to commit this terrible act. When the police arrived, they found that Lauren was still alive. They rushed her to the hospital. However, despite their efforts, she sadly succumbed to her injuries and blood loss before reaching the hospital. When investigators examined the scene, they noticed it appeared too orderly, almost as if it had been staged. The knife was neatly placed on the bed, and the syrup was prominently displayed on the table, matching the details provided in the emergency call. However, they were surprised to find very little blood on Matthew, only a few drops on his shirt and shoes. This led them to suspect that an attempt had been made to clean up the scene before the emergency was reported, indicating that something more complicated was happening. Police believe it was not an accident. Additionally, the police noted Matthew's unusual behavior. He appeared calm despite expressing sadness over his wife's death. This made Matthew the prime suspect in the case, and he was eventually arrested. Authorities confiscated mobile phones, computers, documents, and journals containing Matthew's notes for investigation. A blood sample was also taken for toxicology tests. Investigators faced the difficult task of informing Lauren's family about these developments, leaving them devastated. An autopsy revealed that Lauren had suffered 123 stab and cut wounds. This raised the question, could an over-the-counter cough syrup turn a loving husband into a murderer? The syrup contains two active ingredients. Some believe that taking it in high doses can lead to euphoria, agitation, psychosis, and destructive behavior. To address these concerns, the product's manufacturer issued a statement expressing condolences to Lauren's family while also confirming that there was no evidence linking the syrup to violent behavior. Additionally, toxicology tests on Matthew showed that, although the syrup was detected in his blood, the dosage was not high enough to impact his mental state. Therefore, his claim that he was intoxicated by syrup when he attacked his wife was dismissed. The investigators aimed to understand what led Matthew to commit this act, so they conducted a detailed investigation, gathering information from family and friends. They discovered that Lauren and Matthew's relationship was not as ideal as it appeared in photos. Shortly after their wedding, they began experiencing various issues. Lauren was very independent and hardworking. In contrast, Matthew had a different attitude toward work. He was not motivated to work and often struggled to find or keep a job. Whenever he started a new job, he would quickly quit without explanation. Additionally, Matthew had a problem with overspending, particularly on unnecessary items like game consoles, video games, and online gaming subscriptions. Lauren and Matthew had a savings account for a trip to Disney. However, Matthew spent all the money without Lauren's consent or knowledge, even taking money from her purse, which amounted to stealing. This behavior caused frequent arguments between them. His excessive spending led to financial problems, which the Hugelmayer family recognized. Their relationship became increasingly strained, so Lauren expressed to family and friends that she might leave if things didn't improve. When asked why she hadn't taken that step, she cited her religious belief that everyone can be redeemed if they have faith. This belief motivated her to give her marriage a chance, but in reality, she found it difficult to tolerate her husband's behavior. Friends of Lauren reported that Matthew was controlling and jealous. He wrongly accused Lauren of having an affair with a church friend, despite there being no evidence to back this claim. Matthew had an irrational fear that Lauren would leave him, which stemmed from his previous marriage. He revealed to her that he divorced his first wife because she had been unfaithful, cheating on him with a church staff member. This experience left him in constant fear of abandonment. However, Matthew's behavior was inconsistent. He became very close to a neighbor and spent a lot of time with her. Even though he denied any romantic involvement, Lauren was convinced he was cheating on her with this neighbor. Despite her accusations, Matthew continued to see the woman. During police questioning, the neighbor claimed that their relationship was purely platonic. She explained that they connected because both were dealing with depression and anxiety. However, she noticed that Matthew had begun to discuss painful subjects, mostly related to death, prompting her to limit their interactions. At one point, Matthew claimed he had decided to return to college to pursue his dream of becoming a pastor, in an effort to win back Lauren's trust and save their relationship. Lauren reacted positively to this news. However, as time went on, their situation did not improve. Lauren's relatives observed that she had been in a very bad state and was no longer as happy as she used to be. They felt guilty for not intervening sooner. Lauren's older sister, Beth, made a significant statement. She recounted a phone call with Lauren the night before, during which Lauren was cooking dinner. During that call, the neighbor knocked on the door looking for Matthew. Without hesitation, Matthew left with the neighbor, leaving Lauren's dinner untouched. Beth expressed her frustration, saying she could no longer accept the situation and was convinced Matthew was cheating on Lauren, leading Lauren to decide to leave him. As the police gathered more evidence, the motive behind Lauren's death became clearer. The authorities conducted a detailed investigation of the apartment and confirmed their initial suspicions. Matthew had cleaned up before calling emergency services. Detectives also found what appeared to be an intimate diary of Matthew. This diary contained notes about his arguments with Lauren, his struggles with low self-esteem, and his feelings of insecurity in their marriage, especially since he knew her family had never accepted him. When experts examined Matthew's mobile phone, they discovered troubling search queries in his history. These included questions about the dangers of cough syrup and its effects on consciousness. This strongly suggested two things: first, that the attack was premeditated, and second, that Matthew was trying to mislead the authorities into thinking he was unaware of killing his wife while under the influence of the syrup. An important detail uncovered through Matthew's mobile phone revealed that just hours before he killed his wife, they had a heated argument through text messages and calls. Matthew claimed that Lauren accused him of cheating and expressed her desire to end their marriage, sufficient reason for a troubled mind to decide to kill his wife. Additionally, police discovered a secret Instagram account belonging to Matthew Under. The profile picture featured a character from the movie American Psycho, which is about a serial killer. His posts were filled with screenshots from the movie, and he even shared photos of himself dressed as one of its characters. Moreover, his posts contained themes that were completely contrary to Christian values, despite his self-identification as a believer. The last post was made just days before Lauren's murder and included disturbing photos of himself with a caption that read, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer," along with the hashtag "I found an angel that needs to be killed." Matthew's friend shared that he once expressed a fascination with killing, suggesting that taking a life would be a true joy. This troubling revelation paints a stark picture of Matthew, especially in light of statements made by his first wife concerning their separation. She revealed that their relationship, initially filled with common interests, deteriorated after marriage. Matthew began to overspend and failed to contribute financially. More alarmingly, he became abusive, often pulling her out of bed, throwing her to the floor, and assaulting her during his rages. This behavior left she terrified, leading her to seek a divorce. Her experience closely mirrors that of Lauren. During the trial, the defense argued that Matthew was not in his right mind during the crime and was likely suffering from instability and depression, worsened by substance use. They presented letters from Matthew's friends and colleagues to the court, claiming that his actions were out of character and that he was not a violent person. The trial occurred in October 2018. Although Matthew initially pleaded not guilty, he later accepted a plea agreement. On October 5, the judge found him guilty of first-degree involuntary manslaughter and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lauren's family is still deeply affected by her absence and feels guilty for not stopping her relationship. To honor her memory, they created a foundation focused on raising awareness about abusive relationships and domestic violence. Matthew Phelps was a manipulative person who only cared about his own needs, disguising himself as someone harmless. Sadly, Lauren's compassion blinded her to his true nature, and it may have only been in her final moments that she understood his true character. Unfortunately, there are many individuals like him who can deceive others with ease. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marty Hill. Marty Hill, 42, lives in a cozy little town called Prairie Village, Kansas, USA. She is energetic, cheerful, and kind. From a young age, she was drawn to fine art, dreaming of becoming an artist or designer. To pursue this dream, she worked hard, completed her studies, and gained the necessary educational background. Eventually, she fulfilled her dream by working in the design studio of a clothing company. At the company, Marty is always highly regarded for his outstanding achievements and reliability. So, when she failed to show up for work on September 8, 2010, without any notice, everyone immediately suspected that something was wrong. No one knew what had happened, and she had not requested any leave. Initially, her colleagues hoped she might just be running late. They tried calling her but received no response and decided to wait a little longer. An important meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Marty's attendance was deemed essential. Her absence worried everyone since she was always responsible and fully aware of the meeting's importance. She is usually deeply involved with the group and consistently reports any issues, so her silence in this case is unusual. Growing increasingly uneasy, one of her friends tried calling her repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. Overcome with fear, the friend began to break down in tears, sensing deep in her heart that something terrible might have happened to Marty. A friend decided to find out what had happened to Marty. One of her colleagues offered to visit her house and check on her. He arrived at her quiet residential neighborhood at 11:30 a.m. and knocked on her door, but there was no answer. This seemed odd, especially since her car was parked in the driveway, suggesting she should have been home. He walked around the house but saw nothing unusual, although he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unsettling silence made him uneasy, so he returned to his car. The colleague returned to the office and discussed the situation with the others. They decided it was necessary to call the police to check on Marty. Because Marty had a 15-year-old daughter who was at school at the time, they agreed not to alarm her until they obtained more information about Marty's whereabouts. Eventually, the police were contacted, and the colleague stayed near Marty's driveway, waiting for the police to arrive. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. When the officer knocked on the door, there was no response, and there were no signs of forced entry. Looking through a window, he noticed a woman's purse sitting on the kitchen table, which indicated that Marty should have been inside. Concerned, the officer decided to check the door, suspecting she might be unwell and in need of help. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. The officer entered the house and searched the first and second floors but found nothing out of the ordinary. He then proceeded to check the basement. Using a flashlight, the officer realized there were no lights in the basement. As he descended to the very bottom, he spotted someone lying in a large pool of blood, curled up in a fetal position. The dim light revealed a gruesome scene. The room was splattered with so much blood that it resembled a torture chamber. At first, the police thought the victim was a man due to the large amount of blood, but upon closer inspection, they couldn't even determine the victim's gender. Based on the scene, they concluded that the person was dead. However, to their horror, the victim suddenly turned around and looked directly at them. The police discovered a severe wound on the victim's throat and observed that her face was so swollen, disfigured it resembled a gruesome, bloody mess. Believing the victim was on the verge of death, an officer leaned in and repeatedly asked, "Who did this?" Despite his efforts, the victim struggled to breathe and was unable to speak. Prior to questioning, the officer had already called for medical assistance. Though still alive, the victim was unable to reveal the identity of her attacker. The victim was rushed to the nearest hospital due to her critical condition, which made identifying her difficult. Her injuries were concentrated on her head and face, including multiple skull fractures, facial fractures, a concussion, and cerebral swelling. The wound was particularly devastating, slicing through muscles and vital blood vessels. Medical experts estimated her chances of survival at no more than 20%. Finally, the victim was identified to be Marty Hill, the owner of the home. Against all odds, the doctors managed to save her life. Attention immediately turned to her teenage daughter, Mackenzie, who was contacted right away. Mackenzie was in complete shock and had no idea what had transpired at their home. Upon hearing of the brutal attack, family members rushed to the hospital to be with Marty. The extent of her suffering was unimaginable, and her injuries were so severe that even her own mother didn't recognize her. Unfortunately, the doctors all gave the same grim prognosis regarding her chances of survival. Her condition was serious, but at least it was somewhat manageable. Family members took turns staying by her bedside every day. The situation was so overwhelming that they felt a mix of anger and helplessness. Her son, Stephen, felt the most anger. Living in Texas at the time, he returned home to be with his mother and offer his support. Stephen was the first person to enter the basement where his mother had been found. After the forensic investigator examined the house, they emerged from the basement and strictly prohibited anyone else from entering due to the gruesome nature of the scene. While the relatives grieved, Stephen cleaned up the blood himself. Detectives investigating the tragedy were baffled, unable to determine who could have committed such an act or why. Marty's family and friends were equally perplexed, as no one could imagine her having an enemy capable of such violence. Investigators searched for clues in her personal life, workplace, and relationships with her children but found nothing unusual. The crime was determined to be unrelated to abuse, as Marty's clothes remained intact, a conclusion later confirmed by the Armed Forces analysis. There was no indication of theft, nothing was missing, and the house showed no signs of forced entry. The circumstances of the crime were shrouded in mystery. Even Marty herself was unable to provide any information about the identity of her attacker. The police interviewed Marty's neighbors, but none of them were able to provide any significant information. The only clue reported was a sighting of a red, broken pickup truck near Marty's house at around 8 a.m., driven by a young, light-skinned, short man. This timing aligned with the approximate time of the attack determined by detectives. The officers followed up by visiting the sewing company where Marty worked to interview her colleagues, hoping to identify someone matching the description of the driver. However, this lead turned into another dead end, as none of her co-workers could offer useful information or suggest who might have been driving the pickup truck. Detectives then shifted their focus to Marty's family. They spoke with Marty's mother, Shirley Roth, who provided a potentially valuable lead. Shirley revealed that her daughter had not been romantically involved with anyone since divorcing her ex-husband 7 years earlier. Despite their divorce, they maintained regular contact because they shared custody of their daughter. Shirley explained that, following the divorce, Marty had dedicated herself entirely to her work and children and had shown no interest in dating. In Shirley's opinion, the only person who seemed like a potential suspect was Marty's ex-husband. This lead warranted further investigation, especially since Marty remained unconscious and unable to provide information herself. Detectives continued to speak with family members to identify Marty's ex-husband. Their children were quick to defend their father. Their daughter, Mackenzie, a high school student, took offense at the suggestion that her father could be a suspect. She asserted that her father could not have done such a thing, describing him as calm, non-confrontational, and someone who maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and children. Their son, Stephen, also rejected the suspicion, stating that his father was incapable of committing the crime. Despite this, detectives could not dismiss the theory and decided to investigate it thoroughly. The police then visited Marty's ex-husband at his home. He was fully cooperative, invited them inside, and answered their questions openly. He appeared deeply affected by the incident, expressing that he still cared for Marty and was distressed by what had happened. He expressed relief that she had survived and shared that he was praying for her recovery. Although there was nothing initially suspicious, the police still needed to verify his alibi. He told them that, on the morning of the attack, he had taken his daughter to school before going to work. To confirm his statement, the police spoke with his daughter, Mackenzie, who was living with her grandmother, while they worked on verifying the details he had provided. A DNA sample was taken from him, though analysis would require time. For Mackenzie, the prohibition against seeing her father created additional hardship, making this a challenging period for everyone involved. The police also collected DNA samples from under Marty's nails, along with hair follicles found on her clothing. After comparing this evidence with the ex-husband's DNA, all suspicions about him were completely dismissed. His DNA did not match, and his alibi was verified. As a result, the ex-husband was officially cleared from the list of suspects, much to Mackenzie's relief. The family was finally able to reconnect and support one another as they waited for Marty to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Marty's family tried to piece together what had happened and figure out who might have attacked her. Her mother, Shirley, recalled that not long before the incident, the grandmother's house had been broken into and robbed. This raised fears that the entire family could be targeted by a stalker intent on carrying out violent acts. However, the police had no definite answers, leaving the family engulfed in fear and paranoia. They had no clue who the perpetrator could be and clung to hope that Marty would recover and reveal what had truly happened. The family also recalled that, shortly before the attack, a handyman had visited Marty's house to change the locks. This handyman worked for B&J Construction, a company her mother and grandmother had trusted and hired for years. Coincidentally, he was the only unfamiliar person who had interacted with Marty in recent months. This raised suspicions that the handyman, who often did repair work for the family, might be connected to both the robbery and the assault. The police turned their attention to Brian Pennington, the handyman who had regularly visited Marty's house, her mother's house, and her grandmother's house to handle household repairs and maintenance. At the time, Brian was 26 years old, married, and the father of 2 children. He lived about an hour and a half away in a small town called Leeton, Missouri, with a population of around 500. On September 10, 2010, detectives decided to visit Brian's home. When they arrived, they immediately noticed a broken red pickup truck in the driveway, which matched a description provided by neighbors of a suspicious vehicle. However, the truck did not have license plates, so they were unable to confirm the match. Inside the house, they found Brian, who was cooperative and permitted the officers to enter his kitchen. He answered their questions openly. When asked about the truck, Brian explained that he didn't drive it because it had no license plates. He also mentioned that his last visit to Marty's house had been 3 to 4 days before the attack, during which he had checked the basement equipment. Brian didn't contact the police after seeing on the news that Marty had been attacked. He explained that he didn't know anything and couldn't provide any useful information about the case. Brian wasn't very familiar with Marty. Their interactions had been limited to working together on repairing her house. Although he considered her a respectable woman, that was all he could share with the authorities. However, detectives began to question his account. Their suspicions were triggered by the fresh scratches on his face, which might have been caused during a confrontation with Marty. When asked about these marks, he explained that they were caused by a dog that had scratched him while he was playing in the yard the day before the detectives came to visit. He acted fearful when accused of being involved in the crime, insisting that he was incapable of such an act. Brian provided an alibi, prompting investigators to verify his story. When detectives spoke to Brian's wife, Jessica, they noticed her odd behavior from the outset. She appeared hesitant, seemed afraid to disclose the truth, dodged direct questions, and mentioned there had been tension in their relationship lately. Jessica stated that her husband had been at home that morning, sleeping in another room, and added that the last time he had worked at Marty's house was about a month earlier. She also corroborated Brian's claim that the scratches on his face were caused by a dog. However, her demeanor suggested she was not being truthful. Detectives doubted her account, and she was taken to the station for further questioning. Authorities suspected Jessica might either be an accomplice to the crime or trying to shield the killer. Before leaving Brian's house, the police asked him whether they would find anything suspicious if they searched the property. Brian confidently stated that they wouldn't find anything and even agreed to let them look around. However, in the laundry basket, at the very bottom, they discovered a pair of jeans with suspicious stains. Brian explained that the stains weren't blood but merely machine oil left over from working on a pickup truck. He allowed the police to take the jeans for testing and voluntarily provided his DNA samples for comparison. The items were immediately sent to the forensic lab, where tests confirmed the stains were blood, not oil. However, additional time was needed to extract the DNA profile and compare it. While detectives awaited the test results, Marty regained consciousness in the hospital 12 days after the attack. Although she was able to communicate shortly thereafter, her initial days out of unconsciousness were clouded by confusion. During this time, she experienced constant pain and discomfort. It's not surprising that Marty needed to take a large number of medications during her recovery. Her poor health may have stemmed from her reliance on these drugs, in addition to the severe injuries she suffered. Despite the extensive brain damage she endured, her memory remained largely intact. Marty informed the police that Brian Pennington was the one who had attacked her. She described that morning's incident as starting entirely normally. She woke up early, got ready for work, and followed her usual routine. Around 7:30 a.m., she heard a car stop in front of her house but didn't pay it much attention. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. It was Brian, who had worked on her house about a month earlier. Marty found his visit odd from the beginning. It was unplanned and too early in the morning. However, she reassured herself, thinking he might have been working nearby or had forgotten a tool during his last visit. Although she was hesitant to open the door, she ultimately decided to do so. The two had a brief conversation. Brian was polite and friendly, which helped ease her concerns. Brian explained that he had heard Marty was planning to sell her house and wanted to alert her to a problem he had noticed during the previous renovation. He insisted it was important and offered to show her the issue in the basement. Curiosity overcame her, and she agreed to follow him downstairs. She recounted that everything happened very quickly. Initially, they were just walking downstairs, but an unsettling feeling suddenly came over her. Brian grabbed her and pushed her down the stairs, causing her head to hit hard against the concrete floor. Brian violently attacked Marty, choking her until she lost consciousness. Later, Marty explained that her memories of the incident were hazy, as though she were trapped in a fog. She occasionally regained consciousness, only to lose it again shortly afterward. Eventually, a policeman arrived at her home, and she was taken to the hospital. Investigators needed evidence to support Marty's account. Tests were conducted on a pair of jeans found in Brian's laundry basket, which revealed traces of Marty's blood. DNA samples taken from beneath her fingernails also matched his DNA. Law enforcement officers obtained an arrest warrant for Brian and visited his home, but he was not there. The search for him intensified, and soon police in the city discovered a damaged red pickup truck. Jessica was behind the wheel, and Brian was sitting in the passenger seat, visibly disheveled. Authorities charged Brian with attempted murder and robbery, setting bail at $1 million. The news stunned Marty's mother and grandmother, who had been in contact with Brian for years and trusted him as a professional handyman. Brian frequently worked for Marty's family, completing various household repairs. Tragically, it was Marty's mother who had recommended him to her daughter, leaving her with a deep sense of guilt. The family struggled to comprehend this senseless act of aggression. Brian's cruelty seemed inexplicable, and no clear motive emerged. Although he provided no explanation for his actions, experts were left baffled by the sheer brutality of the attack. Doctors were amazed that Marty had survived at all. Brian's violence extended far beyond simply choking Marty into unconsciousness. He threw her down a staircase, causing her to land headfirst on a concrete floor, fracturing her skull. He continued his attack relentlessly, beating her and slashing her throat. Marty struggled to comprehend what she could have done to warrant such a terrible fate. After sustaining severe head injuries, she faced challenges with her balance, although she eventually managed to walk independently. Shortly after emerging from a coma, she developed visual impairments, along with hearing and cognitive difficulties. Her family noticed that Marty seemed like a shadow of her former self, but they remained hopeful for her recovery. At times, she would lapse into long periods of thoughtfulness, which deeply concerned her loved ones, especially her daughter. Doctors refrained from making a definitive prognosis. While acknowledging the challenges Marty faced, they emphasized that her survival against the odds suggested that recovery was possible. After spending about a month in the hospital, Marty was finally discharged. During her recovery period, she became closer to her 16-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, whose birthday occurred while she was still in the hospital. Mackenzie was deeply touched by a card her mother wrote for her, even though the handwriting resembled that of a child. She recognized the long journey ahead and understood her vital role in supporting her mother as she gradually healed. Marty faced significant emotional challenges after the attack, struggling to reconcile how someone she had trusted deeply could turn out to be a vicious criminal capable of unprovoked violence. Seeking solace, she turned to her local church for emotional support. Meanwhile, Marty's family was determined to ensure that Brian faced justice and received a lengthy prison sentence. The prosecutor's office had overwhelming evidence to press charges against him, including physical proof, Marty's detailed account of the attack, scratches on Brian's face, DNA matches, and items stained with blood. The only missing piece was a clear motive. Brian had neither attempted to abuse Marty nor stolen anything from her home. His actions were simply a deliberate and calculated effort to kill her while working in her house. This act of violence was sudden and seemed to lack any apparent provocation. Marty had no prior conflicts with Brian, and relations between him and other women in her family had been peaceful. However, as police investigated Brian's background, they uncovered a troubling history of criminal activity. He had been convicted in 26 separate cases, most of which were related to domestic violence. His ex-wife and former girlfriends had reported him to the police numerous times. Jessica admitted that she had shielded him out of fear of becoming his next target, as his behavior was systematically abusive. Brian frequently threatened her, exhibiting a clear pattern of cruelty. Jessica testified for the prosecution during the trial, stating that Brian was not home on the night of the attack. She explained that he had been away for hours and only returned around noon, after Marty was assaulted. Upon his return, his clothes were covered in blood. When questioned, he claimed it was machine oil but offered no further explanation. Jessica also refuted his claim that the scratches were allegedly caused by the dog, revealing that he had forced her to lie under the threat of being killed. She provided detailed accounts of their married life, describing him as abusive, both physically and emotionally. During the trial, Brian was visibly shocked when Marty appeared alive in court to testify against him. Jessica, his wife, also testified for the prosecution, presenting evidence that contradicted his statements. Moreover, none of Brian's claims were corroborated during the hearings. Jessica submitted cell phone records showing that, at approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of the attack, she had tried to contact Brian. Geolocation data confirmed that he was near Marty's house at the time. As the evidence against Brian continues to build, he has no viable path to acquittal. To avoid a prolonged and traumatic trial, Brian was offered a plea bargain. Although he could have faced up to 40 years in prison, the deal reduced his sentence to 28 years. However, on the day his sentence was to be announced, Brian unexpectedly attempted to withdraw the plea agreement and plead guilty instead. The court rejected his request, citing no valid justification for accepting it. During the final courtroom proceedings, Marty directly asked Brian why he had attacked her and nearly killed her, but he refused to provide a reason or make any closing statements. Marty is still recovering from the devastating attack, which left permanent scars on her face and neck. The injuries have distorted her facial features and affected her mobility. Despite these challenges, Marty remains determined and continues to train rigorously, believing she can regain her former self or even surpass it. In interviews, she often reflects on how someone only 26 years old could commit such a cruel act. Her resilience and self-belief have helped her heal from this violent incident, strengthening her resolve in the process. Marty returned to her routine fairly quickly and has become even more active. She took up kickboxing to learn self-defense, and sports have played a significant role in her recovery. She also created a website aimed at supporting others who have experienced traumatic events, using her personal story to inspire and encourage healing. In addition to these efforts, Marty continues to work as a designer for a clothing company, channeling her creativity into her art as a way to manage anxiety and stress. She credits her daughter, Mackenzie, as the cornerstone of her recovery and is deeply grateful for her unwavering support. Recently, Marty published a book that details the horrific incident that changed her life, with the hope of inspiring others to overcome adversity through resilience. She now actively works as a motivational speaker, meeting with various communities and offering the same support that helped her rebuild her life. As for Brian Pennington, her attacker, he remains in prison and is estranged from his family, including his mother, ex-wife, and children, who have all cut ties with him. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Viviana Hager. Viviana Hager, a 42-year-old chartered accountant, lived with her husband, Jamie Anguita, a builder, and their 2 daughters in a beautiful home in an upscale area of Puerto Varas, Chile. Jamie and Viviana were introduced through relatives. After moving to the area, Jamie initially stayed with a friend close to Viviana's home until she completed her internship. They did not communicate often, but when they finally met in person, Viviana was around 25 years old. Their friends noted that they had different personalities, which further confirmed the idea that opposites attract. Jamie was described by those who knew him as reserved and not very sociable. In contrast, Viviana was lively and outgoing. She grew up with her mother and siblings, as her father tragically died in a car accident caused by intoxication when she was just 1 year old. Viviana's mother chose not to enter another relationship, believing it was not right to bring a new man into their home. She single-handedly raised all her children. The wedding of Jamie and Viviana was grand and held in an elegant banquet hall. Jamie revealed that it had been challenging to win over his future wife. They spent their honeymoon in the Dominican Republic. Shortly after, Viviana became pregnant, but unfortunately, she could not maintain the pregnancy. In 1996, she gave birth to a daughter. They went through another unsuccessful pregnancy, but that did not affect their relationship. Later, they welcomed the birth of their youngest daughter. After the birth of their second daughter, Viviana decided to take a break from her job at a large carbonated drinks company to focus on raising their children. There were many rumors about Jamie and Viviana's relationship after 18 years of marriage. Some claimed they had a perfect relationship, remaining a loving couple and a stable family. Others suggested that their life together was not as ideal as it appeared. On the morning of June 29, 2010, everything seemed normal at first. After breakfast, Jamie took their daughters to a local language school before heading to work at his construction company. However, Viviana did not clean the dishes from breakfast, nor did she open the curtains to let in light, and she skipped several other usual tasks. According to data on the calls made, Viviana called the school where her daughters studied several times, as well as a photo studio, and contacted representatives of a company that cleaned stoves. Jamie also made a series of calls, one of which was quite unusual. He called his wife's phone at 7:48 a.m., and the conversation lasted less than a minute. Later, he stated that he had called his wife to say goodbye that morning, as he had allegedly forgotten to do so before leaving. In the afternoon, at 1:36 p.m., Jamie was at a bank branch when he received a call. According to Jamie, the caller did not introduce himself and said that Jamie should listen to him if Jamie wanted to see his wife again. The man then heard a woman scream, after which the call allegedly ended. Jamie's statement suggested that he perceived it as a prank or scam, which might explain why he didn't act as most men typically would. He didn't try to contact his wife to find out if she was okay. A few hours later, Jamie's eldest daughter called him and said that her mother hadn't picked her up from school. The girl also mentioned that she was planning to walk home. The path from the school to their home ran through safe areas, but for some reason, Jamie asked her to wait for him. Even after that, he still didn't attempt to contact his wife. On his way to school, Jamie stopped at a small police station to report a mysterious call and his concerns about Viviana possibly going missing. Shortly after, he received another call from his youngest daughter, who had made it home and told him that her mother was not there. She went into her parents' bedroom and found a terrible mess on the bed. Several items and documents were taken from her mother Viviana's purse. The girl also noticed that a small safe, some cameras, and jewelry were missing from their home. After speaking with his daughter, Jamie invited Viviana's older sister, Monica, to stay with his youngest daughter. This time, Jamie made no attempt to contact his wife, despite the seriousness of the situation. When he returned home, the police were already there. They believed that Viviana might have been kidnapped. Gradually, more agents gathered at the house, bringing the necessary equipment in case the kidnapper contacted one of the family members to demand a ransom. By evening, law enforcement officers had thoroughly searched the entire house. They also examined nearby plots of land that could have served as escape routes for the attackers and reviewed a list of residents in the area. However, they found nothing suspicious, which led Jamie to ask them to leave. He expressed concern that their presence was frightening his daughters, especially since they had not received any ransom calls during this time. As a result, the authorities began to consider the possibility that Viviana had left home voluntarily. However, the phone calls she made on the day she disappeared suggested otherwise. She had not taken a change of clothes or any important belongings with her. Consequently, law enforcement concluded that she was likely no longer alive. They searched nearby empty houses, sheds, rivers, and reservoirs, but these efforts yielded no new leads or evidence regarding Viviana's whereabouts. Jamie took various steps to locate his wife, publicly offering a generous reward for any information about her. Unfortunately, these efforts proved ineffective as the investigation continued. It became clear that Jamie and Viviana's relationship was not as perfect as it appeared. Jamie openly admitted to having cheated on his wife multiple times, revealing that she was unhappy in their marriage. For several months, Viviana learned about Jamie's actions accidentally. Out of revenge, she began dating another man. At the same time, Viviana was struggling with depression and had sought treatment. A close friend of Viviana, Jan, informed the authorities about Jamie's abusive behavior towards her. When the police questioned Viviana's boyfriend, Edward, they discovered that he was still in a relationship with her. Edward became a suspect in the investigation, primarily due to the lack of other leads. Eventually, the authorities reached out to Jamie again. They informed him that they planned to conduct a new search of his property, this time using specially trained dogs. Jamie was very interested and inquired about the effectiveness of these methods. The police officer explained that the dogs could identify human remains with almost complete certainty, especially if they had prior experience. Noticing Jamie's genuine interest, the officer invited him to the training facility to see the dogs in action, and Jamie gladly accepted the invitation. Soon after, he visited the facility and learned that dogs could detect human remains even if they were buried up to 3 meters deep. Experts stated that the chances of dogs confusing human remains with those of other animals were zero. Just before the planned search at his house involving the dogs, Jamie himself called the police to request their presence. This call occurred on August 9th at 6:55 p.m., 42 days after Viviana's disappearance. Jamie testified that he detected a strong odor coming from a storage room located behind a wall in one of the bedrooms. When he looked into that room, he saw the silhouette of his wife. However, strangely, he did not go in to check if she was there, which is puzzling because he should have felt it necessary to do so. He reported finding his wife at 6:34, yet it took him over 20 minutes to call the authorities. After 15 minutes, the police and forensic experts arrived. They had been instructed not to leave Jamie alone and not to allow him to take any action at the crime scene. Jamie reiterated that he followed the strong odor, which led him to the storage room behind him and his wife Viviana's bedroom wall. However, this raises a perplexing question: how could this hidden room exist? Notably, it was not included in the original house plans he provided. However, the police officers who worked at the house in the early days after Viviana went missing stated that they had checked the place. They affirmed that they had searched it but did not find anything unusual. Several notable discoveries were made. A safe containing over $1,000,000 was missing, a torch similar to the one used by the miners was found, and there was a fragment from an alternate version of the Bible or a similar document. How did these items end up in the storage room? The bedroom itself had also changed. For instance, next to the entrance of the storage room where Viviana's body was found, there appeared to be an altar adorned with various religious symbols. However, this was not the most peculiar discovery. In the initial weeks, law enforcement officers were present at the house but failed to thoroughly investigate one particular room, which was the most likely location for concealing Viviana's body. Despite the police's lack of attention, a puzzling question arises. Why did the strong odor from the decaying remains only become noticeable on the 42nd day? How could no one have detected it earlier? Additionally, why didn't Jamie, who had been sleeping near this room, notice the smell sooner? It is also concerning that Jamie discovered his wife's body just a day before a planned search involving dogs was to take place at the house. This leads to further questions. What if investigators considered the possibility that Viviana chose to end her life voluntarily? During the autopsy, no signs of foul play were found. There was some speculation that she might have ingested a drug previously discovered in the house. However, if that were the case, why did Jamie readily accept the idea of his wife ending her life? Initial forensic examination results showed no signs of external abuse on Viviana. However, the unusual position in which she was found puzzled experts. Viviana was lying down with her hands raised and her legs bent awkwardly. This posture suggested that she had not simply fallen but rather that someone had placed her in that position. Her relatives were dissatisfied with the autopsy findings and struggled to accept the explanation of a voluntary death. They believed that her husband was responsible for her demise. In their quest for justice, Viviana's family hired lawyers and filed a lawsuit against Jamie, who remained notably indifferent, even at Viviana's funeral, where he showed no emotion. In December, a lawyer representing Viviana's family assisted in bringing charges against her husband. He requested that authorities exhume her remains for a second autopsy, which was conducted in March 2012 by the Metropolitan Forensic Medicine Service. This second autopsy revealed that her wrists had been previously tied with a rope that had been removed after her death. Additionally, experts theorized that Viviana's body had remained in the same location for an extended period without any movement. They also noted possible minor injuries to her head and neck, which might have resulted from targeted blows, a fall, or strangulation. Despite these new findings, the exact cause of her death remained undetermined, and experts were still awaiting the results of a toxicological examination. The legal representative for Viviana's family believes that the injuries on her body suggest she may have been strangled. However, Jamie's lawyers argued that the injuries occurred because Viviana, experiencing suffocation from poison, instinctively grabbed her neck before she died. In 2015, a new suspect was introduced to the case, Jose Perez Mencilla. Jose, a man who has a criminal history, was born in Puerto Varas. He could not complete his education and had to leave school in the 5th grade to work as a combine operator harvesting wheat. In 1980, Jose's family sold some land and moved to Puerto Montt. Those who knew them said this family was not very social and often had arguments. As an adult, Jose worked as a carpenter. Eventually, he left Puerto Montt for Ancud, where he married Clara Ruiz, and they had 2 daughters. However, their relationship was tumultuous. Due to financial issues, Jose frequently had to relocate, sometimes disappearing for months and then returning as if nothing had happened. One of his daughters described her father as a cruel man who often abused her, her sister, and their mother. She claimed he frequently confessed to committing crimes. Eventually, the family fell apart. In 1999, Jose's brother got him a job at a construction company partly owned by Jamie. Since then, Jamie tried to keep Jose close by assigning him various tasks, leading to frequent visits to Jamie's home. Law enforcement traced a call that Jamie received on the day Viviana disappeared. The call was made by the man believed to have kidnapped her. This call originated from an internet cafe. Employees at the cafe provided a description of the caller. Authorities quickly concluded that Jose had reached out to Jamie. They arrested him on December 8, 2015, and Jose quickly admitted to the crime, stating that he had killed Viviana at Jamie's request. According to Jose, Jamie had offered him 5 million pesos to make Viviana disappear completely. During the investigation of the case, Jose recounted that on the morning of June 29, he knocked on the door of Jamie and Viviana's house, and Viviana welcomed him inside because she knew him well. He stated that he had been sent by Jamie to retrieve some tools from the garage. After she led him to the garage, he attacked her, threatened her, and forced her to go upstairs to the storage room, where he killed her. Although most of Jose's testimony seems plausible, there are inconsistencies regarding Viviana's location. He subsequently admitted to stealing some of Viviana's personal items before leaving to call Jamie and fabricate a story about a kidnapping. As a result of this testimony, Viviana's husband, Jamie, was arrested. His oldest daughter, who was studying in Germany at the time, returned home and defended her father. Jamie's defense argued that Viviana had been a victim of a robbery rather than a contracted murder, claiming that Jose's account was fictional. However, the fact that Jose did not take money from the safe undermined the robbery theory. Further investigation revealed that Jose claimed Jamie had paid Jose in haste because he suspected the police were following him. Jamie gave Jose an envelope with only part of the agreed payment. Despite this, Jose did not pursue confrontation, fearing repercussions. By then, over 7 years had passed since Viviana's death, and all involved had been interviewed. The prosecution maintained that it was a contracted murder, while the defense asserted it was merely a robbery. In 2017, the court reached a verdict. Jose Perez Mancilla was sentenced to 10 years in prison for robbery and the murder of Viviana. To everyone's surprise, Jamie was acquitted and released from custody after a lengthy jail term. Justice system representatives indicated that the prosecution lacked solid evidence beyond the testimony of Jose. Had Jamie been found guilty, he would have faced a life sentence as the alleged orchestrator of the crime. After the verdict was reached, Viviana's family told those involved in her death that this was not the court's final decision. Jamie and his daughters filed a lawsuit against the Chilean state, claiming negligence by officials during various stages of the investigation. Additionally, Jamie's representatives criticized the pressure he faced while in detention and sought nearly 1 million Chilean pesos in compensation each year. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Milken family. In the quiet neighborhood near Forbes Lake in Kirkland, Washington, the Milken family exemplified the American dream. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of a well-established life. The head of the family is Leonid Milken, a sergeant in the Washington National Guard. His journey began in 1989 when he and his family emigrated from Ukraine, seeking a new beginning in the United States. By 2006, Leonid was stationed in Iraq, bravely confronting the challenges of war. Despite the distance, his heart remained with his family, and he eagerly counted down the 6 weeks until he could return home. He was deeply supported and cherished by his wife, Olga. Born on July 22, 1977, Olga is a professional dental assistant in Bellevue. She skillfully balanced her career with raising their 2 young sons, was known by neighbors for her friendly and welcoming nature. Olga and Leonid have 2 sons, Justin, who is 5 years old, and Andrew, who is 3 years old. They bring joy and energy to the home. Justin was very proud of his father and often told people that he was in the military. Both boys were loved very much, and their aunt, who is Olga's younger sister, often showered them with special affection. At 24, Lyubov Botvina, Olga's younger sister, was full of ambition and kindness. She was a sophomore at Seattle Pacific University, studying for a bachelor's degree in foreign languages. She often visited the Milkin family to spend time with her nephews, Andrew and Justin. The Milkin family's journey from Ukraine to the United States was challenging. However, with resilience and a love for life, they managed to rebuild their lives from scratch. They settled in Mill Creek, Washington, and became vital members of the local Russian-Ukrainian community. Their home was a warm refuge filled with love, dreams, and a blend of cultures, a place where their past and future were harmoniously connected. Tragically, on July 17, 2006, their story took a horrific turn when an unimaginable incident shattered their world. After firefighters extinguished the fire and entered the ruins of the house, they discovered the bodies. However, these individuals did not die from the fire. The cause of their deaths remains a mystery. They had been stabbed multiple times, sustaining serious injuries. Someone had done this on purpose to make them suffer. The police quickly identified their main suspect, shocking the entire neighborhood. Connor Skierman, a 24-year-old man who had recently moved across the street from the Milkin family just 2 weeks prior, came under suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing him trespassing on their property while carrying a red gasoline container shortly before the fire broke out. The most disturbing detail was the deep scratches on his face, suggesting he had engaged in a struggle, possibly with someone desperate to escape his actions. Connor was arrested on July 19, just 2 days after the murders. During questioning, he confessed to starting the fire but claimed to have no memory of the murders themselves. He said he passed out from drinking too much alcohol that night, specifically 3 bottles of vodka. He only remembered waking up in the Milkin family's house, surrounded by dead bodies. So who was Connor Skierman? He was born in Bellevue, Washington, and before the tragic incident, he appeared to be an ordinary neighbor. However, beneath this facade lay a criminal with dark intentions. He had kept logs of the Milkin family and plotted their demise. Later investigations revealed CCTV footage of him purchasing items to start a fire. Was this act motivated by hatred or a manifestation of a deeper monstrosity within him? This question would linger in the minds of many for years. Before the murders, Connor had no notable criminal history. His violent actions on July 17, 2006, stunned the community, resulting in his arrest and conviction for killing Olga, her 2 young sons, Justin and Andrew, and Lyubov. Connor acknowledged that he showered in Olga's home, changed into the hospital scrubs he found there, and bought gasoline to intentionally set the house on fire in order to conceal his involvement. However, he consistently denied committing the murders. Instead, he pleaded with the jury to trust him. Despite his claims, the evidence against him was overwhelming. When investigators examined the tragedy within the Milkin family, they meticulously collected the necessary evidence to charge Connor. Although the fire destroyed much at the scene, several key discoveries were still made. Among the burnt debris of the Milkin home, a blood-stained hunting knife was found at the bottom of the stairs. This knife was identified as the weapon used in the attack on Olga, Justin, Andrew, and Lyubov. In the master bedroom, where Olga and Lyubov's bodies were discovered, investigators uncovered clothing soaked in blood. This clothing provided DNA evidence that directly linked Connor to the scene of the crime. Additionally, a flashlight located in the same bedroom suggested that the attack was premeditated. A glove, partially burned in the fire, was found near the victims. This item not only placed Connor at the scene but also showed that he attempted to hide his fingerprints during the brutal attack on the family. Furthermore, security camera footage showed Connor buying gasoline from a nearby station shortly before the fire was reported. This evidence supported the timeline and his intention to destroy evidence by igniting the house. During Connor's arrest, officers noted fresh cuts and scratches on his face and neck, consistent with defensive wounds inflicted by the victims during their struggle, further connecting him to the crime. The conclusion was both horrifying and clear. This was not an accident or a drunken mistake. It was a planned massacre, a cold-blooded crime carried out with brutal intent. 3 years later, Connor Skierman's trial began. Selecting the jury took several weeks because the death penalty was a possibility. The prosecutors claimed that Connor had planned the attack, entering the home armed with the intention to kill. They argued that he had brutally murdered an entire family and then attempted to destroy the evidence by setting fire to the house. Connor's defense team focused on a different angle. They argued that he had been in an alcohol-induced blackout. They brought in addiction specialists, psychiatrists, and toxicologists to support their claim that Connor was too intoxicated to have intended to kill anyone and that he couldn't remember the murders due to his blacked-out state. However, the jury did not find this argument convincing. During the sentencing phase, Connor took the stand to give a 25-minute emotional statement. He pleaded with the jury for mercy, apologized to the Milkin family, and admitted to setting the house on fire, but he did not confess to the murders. He appeared subdued, with a face showing regret and anxiety. As he spoke, his voice trembled, and he frequently wiped away tears with a tissue, struggling to stay composed while also conveying his remorse through his slumped posture. During his speech, Connor avoided discussing the details of the crimes, following legal advice and the rules that allow defendants in death penalty cases to talk without being cross-examined. Instead, he concentrated on expressing his regret and the effect that his potential execution would have on his family. However, his words fell short. As he spoke, the Milkin family remained silent, their faces expressing a mixture of emotions, pain, anger, and perhaps a desire for closure. Olga's husband, Leonid Milkin, who was serving in Iraq when the murders occurred, listened closely, but his feelings were hard to read. The pain he endured was unimaginable, and now he had to confront the man responsible for his loss. Connor's defense attorney, James Conroy, argued that Connor was a troubled man who was struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that during the murder, Connor experienced memory loss due to the effects of alcohol. However, the jury found this explanation unconvincing, which led to the guilty verdicts. In this pivotal moment, Conroy hoped that Connor's display of remorse might influence the jury to show mercy. The prosecution, led by King County Deputy Prosecutor Scott O'Toole, presented a contrasting narrative. They portrayed Connor as a calculated murderer who broke into the Milkin family's home and committed horrific acts. The evidence clearly indicated the premeditated nature of his crime. O'Toole emphasized the profound grief of the Milkin family, particularly the innocence of the young boys, Justin and Andrew, whose lives were tragically taken by Connor. As Connor finished his statement, he stared intently at the jury, his eyes expressing desperation. He stated that people had told him that he was going to die and go to hell, adding that he was already there, his voice choked with emotion. After these final remarks, he returned to his seat, leaving the jury to process the heavy burden of his words and the seriousness of their imminent decision. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors contemplated what they had just heard. The decision ahead of them was significant, balancing justice, societal expectations, and the remnants of mercy that Connor's plea aimed to evoke. Many lives are at stake, not just Connor's, but those of others who will forever be affected by his actions. In the days that followed, the jury would deliberate, each member grappling with their conscience, the law, and the emotional testimonies shared during the trial. Connor's statement added a personal element to their responsibilities, humanizing a man found guilty of horrific crimes. Their verdict would determine not just Connor's future, but would also resonate through the lives of the victims' families, the Ukrainian community, and the larger conversation about justice and redemption. Everyone was focused on the jury, anticipating a verdict that would serve justice for the victims. The prosecution pointed to several factors to underscore the gravity of the charges: the multiple victims, with 4 people killed at the same time, their vulnerability, given the young ages of Justin and Andrew, which highlighted the victims' helplessness, and the attempt to conceal the crime, with arson being seen as part of a plan to destroy evidence and cover up the murder. Connor was found guilty of intentionally setting fire to the Milkin residence after the murders, indicating that the murders were premeditated. The prosecution claimed that the fire was a deliberate action to eliminate evidence and obstruct the investigation. On April 12, 2010, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all charges, which included 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree arson. Connor was found guilty of 4 separate counts, each representing a victim: Olga Milkin, Justin Milkin, Andrew Milkin, and Lyubov Botvina. The penalty phase of the trial lasted 2 weeks and was filled with strong emotions. After a day and a half of deliberation, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. On May 5, 2010, Judge Gregory Canova of the Kane County Superior Court officially sentenced Connor to death by lethal injection. As the sentence was announced, Connor allegedly shook his head in disbelief, while Leonid felt a sense of relief that justice had been served. Connor's defense team promptly announced plans to appeal the conviction to the Washington State Supreme Court, citing issues with jury selection and comments made by the prosecution during the trial. Connor's family, who were present at the sentencing, chose not to speak to the media. King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg addressed reporters at a press conference, stating that the death penalty is the law in the state and is reserved for the worst crimes. Satterberg, who was not in office when the death penalty was sought against Connor, praised the prosecution team for successfully presenting the case to the jury, which he believed made the right decision. He expressed sympathy for the victims, mentioning that they were wonderful people whose American dream had been tragically shattered. In 2018, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional, citing its inconsistent application and potential racial biases. This landmark decision resulted in all death sentences in the state being commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, Connor's death sentence was changed to life imprisonment without parole. Despite facing significant challenges, the Kirkland community came together to support Leonid Milkin. During this difficult time, he found his neighbors ready to help him fight for his rights and rebuild his home. Local veterans and volunteers led the rebuilding efforts, while companies generously donated materials and labor. Together, they transformed the site of tragedy into a hopeful home, symbolizing resilience in the face of injustice caused by a man who disrupted their lives. Leonid, a sergeant, had come to the United States to provide a better life for his family, but after the tragedy, he was left to rebuild his life on his own. By 2010, 4 years after the murders, he was preparing to move back into his reconstructed home. He viewed it as both a memorial to his lost family and a fresh start for his future. He now lives there, carrying with him the memories of his 2 sons and beloved wife, still questioning why his peaceful life was taken from him. The Milkin family massacre remains one of the most horrific crimes in Washington's history, a tragedy that shattered a family and deeply impacted the community. What do you think? Did justice truly prevail, or did Connor evade the punishment he deserved? Let's discuss. If you're interested in more cases like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next exploration of true crime's darkest stories.